Daniel Whitmore grabbed Victoria Hayes by the wrist in front of 400 people and twisted. Not a touch, not a warning. A grip designed to cause pain, and everyone in that ballroom heard the sound she made. "Sign it," he said into her ear, "or I will destroy everything your father ever built, starting with you." She didn't scream. She didn't fight back. She looked at 400 frozen faces. 400 phones already recording 400 people who knew her name and her company and her net worth. And she whispered the words that stopped the room cold. "Please, don't hurt me again." Nobody moved. Until a man in work boots stepped out of the crowd, a man nobody knew, nobody invited, and nobody ever expected. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you want to find out what that man in work boots did next, subscribe and stay with me. This is only the beginning. The ballroom of the Harrington Grand Hotel in downtown Chicago smelled like money and ambition, expensive cologne, leather portfolios, the faint trace of champagne that cost more per glass than most people's hourly wage. The chandeliers above threw golden light across 500 square feet of polished marble, and the crowd of 400 guests moved through it the way people move when they know they're being watched, and they want to look like they belong. Victoria Hayes stood near the east windows, holding a glass of sparkling water she hadn't touched in 40 minutes, watching the room, the way she always watched rooms, like a chess player reading a board 3 moves ahead. She was 41 years old, 5'7", and wore a midnight blue dress that said she hadn't chosen it to impress anyone. Her dark hair was pulled back sharp and clean, the way she kept everything in her life controlled, precise, purposeful. She had built Hayes Technology Group from a 12-person startup into a company that employed 11,000 people across 7 countries. Her face had been on the cover of Forbes twice. She had testified before Congress on data security legislation. She had been profiled, photographed, criticized, celebrated, and quietly feared by people who wouldn't admit they feared her. But tonight, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Victoria Hayes was afraid. Not the abstract kind of afraid. The fear of a bad quarter, or a hostile takeover, or a regulatory investigation. This was something older and more physical. The kind of fear that lives in your chest and makes your hands go cold. She felt it the moment Daniel Whitmore walked into the room. Daniel was 53, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with the particular confidence of a man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. He was the kind of good-looking that photography loved, strong jaw, silver at the temples, eyes that could go warm or cold, depending on what the situation required. For 9 years, he had been Victoria's chief operating officer, the second name on every major decision, the man she had trusted to build the operational spine of everything she created. For 9 years, she had not known who he really was. She found out 6 weeks ago. It started with a call from their internal auditor, a quiet, nervous man named Paul, who told her there were irregularities in 3 sets of corporate documents. Financial restructuring filings, partnership agreements, a series of legal addendums that had been processed through legal during a period when Victoria had been managing her father's final illness and had given Daniel broader signing authority. She pulled the documents herself. She sat in her office alone for 4 hours reading them. What she found was methodical, patient, and almost elegant in its construction. Daniel had spent 18 months quietly repositioning assets, rerouting equity structures, and embedding legal language into agreements that on the surface looked like standard operational efficiency moves. But read carefully. Read by someone who understood exactly what she was looking at, they told a different story entirely. He was building a mechanism, a legal architecture designed to force her hand. If she signed the final document, the one her assistant had placed in her calendar as a routine partnership renewal for tonight's event, she would effectively surrender operational control of Hayes Technology Group. Not the title, not the office, not the public face, but the real levers of power, budget authority, board appointment rights, final decision-making on acquisitions and divestitures. All of it would shift, buried in language so dense that 3 different corporate attorneys had already missed it. Victoria had not signed, and she had not confronted Daniel, because she was smart enough to know that what you do with information is more important than the information itself. She spent 6 weeks building a case. She brought in outside counsel, a firm in New York that had no connection to anyone in Daniel's network. She documented everything. She said nothing publicly, moved carefully, and waited. Tonight was supposed to be the night she made her move. The Chicago Technology Leadership Forum was one of the most important networking events of the year. Victoria had been scheduled to speak on a panel at 9 o'clock. In the lobby before the formal proceedings, she had planned to hand-deliver a letter to 2 specific board members who she knew were not in Daniel's pocket. She needed 30 minutes and 2 private conversations. She had gotten neither. Because Daniel had arrived early, and he had been watching her from the moment she walked in. She felt his eyes before she saw him. It was a skill she had developed over years, a kind of social sonar that let her read a room without appearing to look. She kept her face neutral and tracked him in her peripheral vision as he crossed the floor, exchanging handshakes and confident laughter. Working the room the way he always did, easy and assured. But she noticed the difference tonight. The way he kept angling back toward her. The way his eyes flicked to her purse where the envelope of documents was. The way his jaw was set in a way she recognized from 9 years of watching him under pressure. He knew she knew. She wasn't sure how. Maybe Paul had talked. Maybe one of the outside attorneys had a connection she hadn't traced. Maybe Daniel was simply smart enough to read her behavior over the past 6 weeks and draw his own conclusions. It didn't matter now. What mattered was the envelope in her bag and the 2 board members she needed to reach. She spotted Martin Cho near the bar, 60 years old. Former federal judge. The one board member who had known her father personally and had always voted with integrity over convenience. If she could get to Martin, she could start the chain of events that would unravel everything Daniel had built. She set down her untouched water glass and began moving. She was 12 feet from Martin Cho when Daniel's hand closed around her arm. His grip was not dramatic. That was the thing she would remember later, how ordinary it felt at first. How much it resembled the kind of casual arm touch that happened at business events 100 times a night. A hand on an elbow. A guiding pressure. The body language of a colleague saying, "Come with me for a moment." But the pressure was wrong. Too firm. Not the touch of a colleague. She turned to face him. "Daniel." Her voice was even. She had practiced keeping it even. "Victoria." He smiled, and it was the old smile, the one that had made her trust him in the beginning. "Walk with me for a minute. I have somewhere to be." "You do," he said quietly. "With me, right now." He began moving toward the corridor that led to the private meeting rooms on the east side of the ballroom. He didn't drag her. He didn't make a scene. He simply applied enough steady pressure to her arm that moving with him was physically easier than resisting, and they were close enough to other guests that anyone watching would have seen 2 colleagues stepping away for a private word. She went. Not because she was weak, because she was calculating. The corridor was quieter. The noise of the ballroom dropped behind them as they moved past 2 security guards who were looking the other way, past a catering cart, through a doorway, into a narrow antechamber that smelled like furniture polish and old carpet. Daniel released her arm and turned to face her. "You canceled the signing," he said. No preamble, no performance. Just the flat statement of a man who had run out of patience. "I did," Victoria said. "The document needed to be executed tonight. That was the timeline." "The document," Victoria said, keeping her voice very steady, "is a fraudulent restructuring of corporate authority built on 18 months of falsified filing addendums. And you know exactly what I'm talking about." The silence lasted 3 seconds. Then Daniel's face changed. It was subtle, a flicker, a tightening around the eyes. But she had known him for 9 years, and she saw it clearly the moment when he stopped pretending they were still colleagues. "You've been talking to someone," he said. "I've been doing my job." "Victoria." His tone shifted. Not threatening, yet something more careful, more deliberate. "You don't fully understand what's at stake here. This isn't about control. This is about protecting the company from decisions that could—" "Don't," she said. "Don't give me the speech. I've read every page. I understand exactly what the mechanism does, and I understand exactly why you built it. So let's not waste each other's time." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Sign the document." "No." Sign it, Victoria. I said no, Daniel, and that was when his hand came up and closed around her wrist. Not her arm this time. Her wrist, and the grip was different. Hard enough that she felt the bones shift, and she pulled back instinctively, and he pulled with her, and suddenly they were no longer in a quiet, private moment. They were moving back through the doorway into the corridor, back toward the edge of the ballroom, back into the light. Later, journalists and bloggers and people who watched the video on social media would describe what happened next in very different ways, depending on what they wanted the story to be. Some would say it was a business dispute that got heated. Some would say it was an abuse of power. Some would say Victoria had been building to this breakdown for months. None of them were there. Here is what was there. A woman in a midnight blue dress. Her right wrist, held in a man's grip, being pulled through the edge of a crowded ballroom, while 400 people at the annual Chicago Technology Leadership Forum slowly became aware that something was happening and then became very still. The music from the event's live jazz quartet did not stop immediately. It took them another 8 seconds to notice. In those 8 seconds, Victoria said clearly and distinctly, loud enough for the nearest 30 people to hear, "Let go of me." Daniel did not let go. "You are making this worse," he said low and tight. "Stop making a scene and come with me." "Daniel." Her voice cracked on his name, not from weakness, but from the sheer force of trying to control herself in a moment that was unraveling faster than she could manage. "Let go of my wrist right now." The jazz quartet stopped. The room had gone quiet enough that the city noise from outside distant traffic, a car horn 3 floors below, was audible. 400 people. Many of them had met Victoria Hayes in professional contexts. Many of them had sat in her presentations, read her company's earnings reports, discussed her on quarterly calls. A significant number had opinions about her, strong, complicated opinions, the kind people form about powerful women in powerful positions. And every single one of them stood still. Phones came up. Not to call for help, to record. The 2 security guards near the doorway looked at each other, looked at Daniel, looked at their shoes. Martin Cho, the board member Victoria had been trying to reach, was standing 11 feet away. He had his drink in his hand, and his face had gone white. He did not move. Victoria looked at him. For just a second she looked directly at Martin Cho, and he looked back at her, and she watched him decide not to help. Something broke in her in that moment. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone could see on her face, but something old and tired gave way, and she heard herself say words she hadn't planned to say, words she would not have chosen if she'd had any choice left in her. "Please." Her voice had dropped to almost nothing. "Please don't hurt me again." The again fell into the silence of that room like a stone into still water, and nobody moved. He was standing near the back. He had been there for about 40 minutes, which was 40 minutes longer than he'd planned to be. Ethan Miller was 36 years old, 6'1", with the kind of build that came from actual physical labor. Broad shoulders, forearms, with visible muscle definition. Hands that were calloused in specific places from specific kinds of work. He was wearing a collared shirt that was clean and pressed, but visibly not the kind of thing people wore to events like this. Dark slacks that were slightly too short, and work boots that he had polished that morning, but which remained unmistakably work boots. I did not belong at the Chicago Technology Leadership Forum. He had come because his buddy Marcus worked catering and had put him on the secondary guest list as a favor, knowing Ethan was trying to make connections in the green construction space. There was a speaker on sustainable building materials that Marcus thought might be relevant to the affordable housing project Ethan was trying to fund. The speaker had been pushed to tomorrow. Ethan had found that out when he arrived, had stayed anyway, because Marcus wanted company on his break, and had spent the last half hour near the rear of the ballroom with a glass of ginger ale, watching a world that had nothing to do with him. His daughter Sophie was with his neighbor Mrs. Kowalski tonight. Sophie was 7, had recently lost her first tooth, and had made Ethan promise to text her a picture of anything interesting he saw. He was thinking about that, about what counted as interesting to a 7-year-old, when the music stopped and he heard a woman's voice say with a clarity that cut through 400 people of stunned silence, "Please, don't hurt me again." Ethan Miller had spent 6 years in the United States Army, 3 of them attached to a special operations unit that conducted personnel recovery operations in some of the most difficult environments on the planet. He had trained for 1,000 different scenarios in 100 different countries. He had learned specifically and deliberately how to read a situation in the first 3 seconds, determine the critical variables, and act without hesitation. He had not done that work in 8 years. But the body doesn't forget. He was moving before he finished the thought. The crowd parted not willingly, not with intention, but because a man moving with that particular combination of speed and absolute calm creates its own kind of space. People stepped aside the way people step aside from something they don't fully understand but recognize instinctively. Ethan crossed 40 feet of marble floor in approximately 6 seconds. He came to a stop between Victoria Hayes and Daniel Whitmore. Not in front of Victoria. Between them. The distinction was intentional. He placed his body precisely so that Daniel would have to move through him to reach her, while Victoria had clear space behind her. Daniel looked at him. In the way that powerful men look at inconvenient objects. "This is a private conversation," Daniel said. His voice was controlled. He had released Victoria's wrist when Ethan appeared, not from conscience. Ethan noted, but from calculation. The grip was no longer useful to him. "Didn't look private," Ethan said. He was not loud. He was not aggressive. His voice was the voice of someone making an ordinary factual observation about the weather. "I don't know who you are," Daniel said, "but you're about to make a very significant mistake." "Okay," Ethan said. "Just that. Okay." Daniel blinked. He had expected argument or submission or some combination of both. He had not expected okay delivered with complete indifference. "Walk away," Daniel said. "Right now, before this becomes something you can't come back from." "Sir," Ethan said in the same calm tone, "I'm going to need you to take 2 steps back." "Do you have any idea who I am?" "I do not," Ethan said. "And it doesn't change anything." Behind Ethan, Victoria had taken 2 steps back herself, creating distance. She was breathing in measured pulls, trying to reassemble her composure. Her wrist ached. She was watching the man in the work boots with an expression she couldn't entirely identify, something between confusion and a disbelief so profound it had circled back to something quieter. Daniel looked past Ethan at Victoria. "This isn't over," he said. "No," Victoria said. "It isn't. You're going to lose everything. Maybe." She had steadied her voice. "But not tonight. And not to you." Daniel looked back at Ethan. He did the thing powerful men do when they want to communicate a threat without actually making one. A long look. A deliberate assessment. A slow nod. Then he turned and walked back into the crowd. The room exhaled. 400 people who had spent 30 seconds recording a crisis on their phones suddenly had to reckon with the fact that the crisis had ended and they had done nothing. The social recalibration was audible, the murmur of voices restarting, the clink of glasses being picked back up, a few self-conscious coughs. The jazz quartet started playing again, quietly, with the slightly chastened rhythm of musicians who knew they'd missed their cue. Ethan turned around. Victoria was looking at him. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was even again the professional voice, the CEO voice. But her eyes were doing something different, something more honest. "Are you hurt?" Ethan asked. He glanced at her wrist. She followed his look. There was a mark beginning, a redness that would probably bruise by morning. "I'm fine," she said automatically. "That's not what I asked." She looked at him again. "No," she said after a pause. "I'm not fine. But I don't think that's I mean." She stopped, started again. "I don't usually." She stopped again. "You don't have to explain anything," Ethan said. Simple, without judgment. He looked around the room, and his assessment was quick and specific. The 2 security guards were moving toward them now, 2 minutes too late, but moving. Several people with cameras were still recording. Daniel had disappeared into the crowd near the far exit. "Is there someone here with you?" Ethan asked. "Friend, colleague, anyone?" "No." The word came out before she thought about it, and it was true, and the truth of it landed in her chest in a way she hadn't expected. She had 400 acquaintances in this room, and not one person she could call to stand beside her. "I'm alone." Ethan nodded like this was information that required a practical response. "There's a sitting area off the lobby," he said. "Out of the cameras. You probably want 5 minutes that aren't being recorded." "How do you—" She stopped. "You scanned the room when you came in." "Habit," he said. "What kind of habit?" He looked at her steadily. "The kind you develop when it matters." They moved through the lobby without discussion. The sitting area was where he said it was a cluster of chairs and a low table behind a pillar, semi-enclosed with a sightline to the entrance, but out of direct camera range. Victoria sat. She put her hands in her lap and looked at them for a moment. A small voice said, "Daddy, is the lady okay?" Victoria looked up. Beside Ethan materializing from behind his left leg, with the particular sudden appearance of a child who has been carefully staying quiet, and has now reached the limit of staying quiet, was a girl who appeared to be about 7 years old. She had her father's dark eyes and a gap where a front tooth had been, and she was wearing a dress that someone clearly not a professional had attempted to iron. In her hand, she held a small first aid kit with cartoon bandages printed on the fabric of the case. "This is Sophie," Ethan said. "She wanted to make sure you were okay. She's been carrying that kit since she found it in my truck this morning." Sophie looked at Victoria with complete seriousness and held out the kit. "It has regular bandages and the purple ones," Sophie said. "The purple ones are better, but there's only 2 left, so we should probably save those for if it's really bad." Victoria stared at the little girl. Something shifted in her chest. Something completely involuntary. A loosening of the tension she had been holding for 6 weeks, for 6 months, possibly for longer than she could accurately measure. Her throat tightened in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "Thank you," Victoria said. Her voice was not the CEO voice. "Sophie." "You're welcome." Sophie looked at her father. "Daddy, her wrist is red." "I know, Bug. Should we put the regular bandage or—" "We'll see." Sophie sat down in the chair next to Victoria, with the confident familiarity of a child who has not yet learned that adults sometimes want to be left alone, and opened the kit and began arranging the bandages by size. Victoria looked at Ethan. "Your daughter came with you," she said. "Marcus was supposed to watch her, but his shift ran long." He sat across from them. "She's good. She knows how to be quiet when she needs to." "I wasn't quiet," Sophie said without looking up from the bandages. "You were quiet for a long time," Ethan said. "I was quiet for like 4 minutes. That's not a long time, that's just a normal amount of quiet." "That's probably fair," Ethan conceded. Victoria laughed. She didn't plan to. It came out of her the way things come out when you've been holding too much for too long, and something unexpectedly precisely human appears at exactly the wrong moment. It was a short laugh, and it cracked slightly at the end, and she pressed her hand over her mouth. "Sorry," she said. "I'm sorry. I don't know why." "Don't be sorry," Ethan said. "Sophie has that effect on people." "I don't know why I'm laughing," Victoria said. Tonight has been rough," Ethan said. "That's one word. What's a better word?" She thought about it. "I don't have one yet." The security team arrived 3 minutes later. 2 men in blazers, who had clearly spent the previous 3 minutes debating with each other about what to do, and had reached no satisfying conclusion. They asked Victoria if she wanted to file a report. She said she wanted their incident documentation, but that she would handle the formal response through her own legal team. They asked if the man who'd intervened was with her security detail. No, Victoria said. They looked at Ethan. "Sir, what is your name, and what is your relationship to Ms. Hayes?" Ethan looked at Victoria. She looked back at him. "He's with me," she said. "He's fine." The security team retreated to write their report. Victoria's phone had been vibrating continuously for the past 4 minutes. Her assistant, her PR head, 3 board members, and 2 numbers she didn't recognize that were almost certainly journalists. She silenced it. "You should probably make some of those calls," Ethan said. "I know." She didn't move. Sophie had finished organizing the bandages and was now drawing something in a small notebook she'd produced from somewhere. The scratch of pencil on paper filled the quiet between the 3 of them. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said. "Sure." Why did you step in? You don't know me. That man, he has resources. He could make serious trouble for a person who— I know, Ethan said. So why? He was quiet for a moment. Sophie asked me, he said simply. Victoria blinked. What? She saw what was happening. She asked me why that man was hurting you. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. I didn't have a good answer for that. And I didn't have a good answer for why nobody was doing anything. So you just stepped in. Somebody had to. There were 400 people in that room. There were 400 people watching, he said. That's different. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. Who are you? She asked. Not as a social question. Not as a CEO assessing a person's credentials. As a genuine inquiry, the kind she hadn't made in years. Ethan Miller, he said. I do construction, affordable housing mostly up in the Pilsen neighborhood. Before that, I was in the Army. How long? 6 years. What did you do? Personnel recovery. He said it simply without inflation. Finding people who were in places they shouldn't be. Getting them out. She was quiet for a moment. That explains some things. Does it? The way you moved. The way you positioned yourself. She paused. The fact that you scanned for camera locations in a hotel lobby before you sat down. Something moved briefly in his expression, acknowledgement, and something under it that he didn't elaborate on. Old habits. Why did you leave the Army? The question was more direct than she intended, the kind of question you don't ask someone you met 40 minutes ago. But the night had done something to the ordinary rules of distance. He looked down at his hands for a second. Lost someone I couldn't get out, he said. Decided I needed to do something different. He said it in the way a man says something that is both completely true and only the surface of the truth. I'm sorry, Victoria said. It was a long time ago. From the chair beside her, Sophie looked up from her drawing and said with the unfiltered directness of a 7-year-old. That's when he decided to build houses for people who need them, so he could still help people, but not get shot at anymore. Ethan looked at his daughter. Sophie. That's what you told me, Daddy. I know. That doesn't mean it needs to be the first thing we tell someone we just met. She asked, Sophie said reasonably, and went back to her drawing. Victoria looked at Sophie, then back at Ethan. She's right, though. That's a good answer. It's a 7-year-old's answer. Sometimes those are the best ones. They sat there for another 15 minutes. Long enough for Victoria's PR head to call twice more, and for Victoria to answer on the third call, and say in the quiet voice of someone who is not going to argue, I'm aware, I'll call you in an hour, don't release anything. Long enough for Sophie to finish her drawing and present it to Victoria, without preamble, a figure in a blue dress, standing very tall, next to a figure in boots, next to a smaller figure with a gap in her teeth. All three of them holding hands with the unself-conscious sincerity of a child who decides that's what happened and draws it that way. Victoria held the drawing. She looked at it for a long time. This is us, she said. Sophie said. You gave us all the same size hands. Everybody has the same size hands in my drawings, Sophie said. It's easier. I'm keeping this, Victoria said. Sophie looked pleased and slightly unsurprised. Ethan stood. You should probably get somewhere safe tonight. Do you have somewhere to go that isn't connected to your company, somewhere he can't find easily? Victoria thought about her apartment. The address was in the company's HR system, which Daniel still had access to, until her legal team formally froze it, which hadn't happened yet. Her assistant knew the address. 3 board members knew the address. It was not, she realized, a safe place tonight. My hotel room is here, she said. Booked under the company account. Also not safe, Ethan said. She looked at him. I have a guest room, he said. It's not... He paused, and she could see him choosing words carefully. It's not what you're used to, but it's somewhere he doesn't know about, and you'd be able to make your calls and think clearly without wondering who's listening. You're inviting me to stay at your house, Victoria said very slowly. Yes. You met me 35 minutes ago. I know. That's unusual, he said. Yes, you don't have to say yes. It's a straight offer. No strings, no expectations. You can say no, and I'll find you somewhere else to go. Or you can sit here and use the hotel lobby. Or you can go up to your room and take the risk. But I've got a guest room with a lock on the door and a very effective 7-year-old alarm system, and if that man shows up, he said it without drama, I'll know what to do. Victoria looked at Sophie, who had found a second pencil and was adding details to something in her notebook. She looked back at Ethan. "Do you always make decisions this fast?" she asked. "Only when they're simple," he said. "This is not a simple situation." "The situation isn't," he agreed. "The decision is." She stood straightening her dress, reassembling some professional layer over the person underneath it. She picked up her bag, the envelope of documents still inside. "I need to make 2 calls first," she said. "Then yes." He nodded. He didn't look surprised or triumphant or even particularly pleased with himself. He just looked like a man who had made a practical suggestion that had been practically accepted and was now moving on to logistics. Sophie looked up. "Are you coming to our house?" "I think so," Victoria said. Sophie considered this. "You can have the room with the window," she said. "I always give that room to guests because the light is nice in the morning. Daddy doesn't think about that stuff." "I appreciate it," Victoria said. "You're welcome," Sophie said, and closed her notebook with the satisfied finality of someone who has handled everything correctly. In the town car on the way to Pilsen, Ethan's truck was a 2014 Ford F-150 that he apologized for, and Victoria said she had sat in worse and meant it. Victoria made her 2 calls. The first was to her outside counsel in New York. She said, "It moved tonight. Get the board notification drafted and the emergency injunction ready. I'll call you in the morning with the timeline." The second was to Martin Cho. Martin answered on the second ring. He sounded ashamed, which was appropriate. "Victoria, I'm not calling to discuss what happened in that room," she said. "I'm calling because I need you to know 2 things. First, by Monday morning, you'll have a full documentation package in your hands that will explain exactly what Daniel has built over the last 18 months. Second, when this board meeting happens, you're going to have to decide what kind of person you want to be. And I think you already know the answer. You've just been afraid of it." Silence. "I'm sorry, Victoria. Tonight I—" "Get some sleep, Martin," she said. "Read the documents when they come. Call me after." She hung up. Ethan was driving. Sophie had fallen asleep against the window within 4 minutes of the truck starting with the absolute trust of a child who has never once doubted that she would arrive safely wherever her father was taking her. The city moved past outside the windows lit storefronts, late-night restaurants, people in 2s and 3s on sidewalks, the ordinary permanent texture of a city that does not pause for anyone's crisis. "You handled that well," Ethan said. "Not a compliment exactly, more like an observation." "I've been preparing for this for 6 weeks," Victoria said. "The calls I knew how to make, the rest of tonight." She stopped. "Was different," he said. "Yes." She looked out the window. "When I said please don't hurt me again, I don't know why I said again. I've never—" She paused. "He's never physically hurt me before. The again was—" She stopped again. "You don't have to explain it," Ethan said. "I want to," she said, and surprised herself by meaning it. The again was, I think it was about something older. Something from before him. "My father was—" She chose words carefully. "He was a good man, and I loved him. But he ran his business and his household the same way. Everything was conditional. Approval was conditional. Safety was conditional. You met the standard, or you faced consequences. And I—" She looked at her hands. "I built my whole life trying to meet a standard that kept moving. I thought Daniel was a partner. I didn't see what he was building because I was too busy trying to be enough." The truck was quiet for a moment. "That's not a character flaw," Ethan said. "That's what trust looks like when it gets exploited." She looked at him in the dark of the cab. "Do you always say the right thing?" she asked. "No," he said simply, and without false modesty. "I say the right thing when I know what it is and it's easy to say. I've said plenty of wrong things. Ask Sophie." "Daddy said the wrong thing about my dance recital," Sophie said without opening her eyes from the back seat. "I thought you were asleep," Ethan said. I was resting. Those are the same thing. They're not the same thing, Sophie said serenely and appeared to go back to resting. Victoria looked out the window. Somewhere in the city, Daniel Whitmore was making calls. She knew this. She could almost feel the machinery starting up, the PR consultants, the friendly journalists, the board members. He had in his pocket the legal team. He was moving. He was going to move fast, and he was going to be precise. And by morning, there would be a story being told about Victoria Hayes that she had not written and could not fully control. She knew all of this. And sitting in a 2014 Ford F-150, driven by a man she had known for less than 2 hours, with a 7-year-old child, asleep in the back seat, who had given her a drawing of 3 people with the same size hands. She felt something she had not felt in longer than she could measure, like she was in the right place. Not the safe place. Not the strategic place. Not the place she had planned to be. The right place. "What time does Sophie wake up?" she asked. 6:30, Ethan said. "She sets her own alarm. Has since she was 6. I tried to talk her out of it and lost." "Does she make breakfast?" "She makes the coffee. She can't reach the machine, so she does the measuring and I do the pouring, but she considers it her project." "That's," Victoria started. "A lot," Ethan agreed. "She's a lot." "I was going to say impressive." He smiled in the dark. She could see it from the side, a brief, genuine thing that had nothing performed about it. "Yeah," he said. "She is." The guest room in Ethan Miller's house in Pilsen was not large. It had a full-size bed with a quilt that looked handmade, a wooden dresser with a small mirror, and a window that looked out over the backyard, where a rusted basketball hoop listed slightly to the left. It also had taped to the wall beside the window a piece of paper in Sophie's handwriting that said, "Guests, the light comes in at 7 a.m. It's nice. Sophie." The apostrophe was missing from "it's." The sincerity was not. Victoria sat on the bed in the silent house. She still had her phone in her hand. She still had calls, she could make strategies, she could pursue moves, she could play. The legal mechanisms once set in motion would run whether she slept or not. She looked at Sophie's drawing, which she had folded carefully and carried in her other hand the whole way from the hotel. 3 figures, same size hands, standing in a row. Victoria Hayes, who had built a billion-dollar company and lost the thread of who she was inside it, placed the drawing on the dresser where she could see it. She turned off the lights. Outside in the hallway, she heard Sophie's footsteps, small and certain, padding past the door, and Ethan's quieter step behind them, and Sophie's voice saying something she couldn't quite catch, and Ethan's low response, and then the house going quiet. She lay down. She did not sleep for a long time. But for the first time in 6 weeks, in 6 months, in possibly 6 years, she was not afraid of the morning. The morning would bring everything she feared and more. By sunrise, Daniel Whitmore had already made his first move, and it was not the one Victoria expected. The house on South Paulina Street was quiet at 5:47 in the morning, but Victoria was already awake. She had not slept more than 2 hours. Not because the bed was uncomfortable. The quilt was heavy and warm and smelled like fabric softener, but because her mind had not stopped running since the moment her head touched the pillow. Every angle, every variable, every move Daniel would make, and every counter she needed to have ready before he made it. Her phone showed 41 missed notifications. She had silenced it at midnight and had not looked at it since. She looked at it now and felt something close to nausea. Not fear exactly, but the specific dread of a person who knows that the world has been moving without them and has no idea yet what shape it has taken. She sat up and opened her email. The first message was from her PR director. Renata Cruz sent at 2:14 in the morning. Subject line: "He moved fast." Victoria opened it and read the 3 paragraphs without blinking. Daniel had already talked to 2 journalists, one from the Chicago Tribune, one from a financial news outlet that specialized in technology sector coverage. Both had been given what Renata described as a coordinated narrative language that told Victoria these were not casual phone calls, but a prepared campaign. The story being planted was this: Victoria Hayes had experienced a public emotional breakdown at the Chicago Technology Leadership Forum, had behaved erratically during a routine business discussion with her COO, and that certain members of the board had privately expressed concern about her ability to lead the company through a critical strategic period. Victoria read it twice. Then she sat for exactly 30 seconds doing nothing. Then she wrote back to Renata. "He's running the instability narrative. We expected this. Do not respond to either journalist tonight. Get me a call at 7 a.m. with legal and communications together. I want one unified response ready by 9. She sent the message, put the phone face down on the quilt, and breathed. She had expected the narrative. She had built this into her planning. The instability story was the obvious move. It reframed everything that had happened at the hotel as evidence of her weakness, rather than his aggression. If he could establish that story first, if he could get enough people inside the company to quietly nod along, he could walk into the board meeting with a case for interim leadership changes that looked reasonable on the surface. She had expected it. It still felt like being hit. Not because she doubted herself, but because she knew how these stories moved. She had watched other executives, mostly women. She noticed the pattern was impossible to miss, get consumed by exactly this kind of campaign. The story didn't have to be true. It just had to be the first story. First impressions in a crisis moved like water through sand, and by the time you tried to correct them, they had already soaked through to places you couldn't reach. She stood up, straightened her dress. She had no other clothes, a practical problem she would deal with shortly, and opened the bedroom door. The hallway smelled like coffee. She followed it. The kitchen was small and bright, and Sophie Miller was standing on a step stool at the counter with the focused expression of a person performing surgery. She was measuring coffee grounds with a tablespoon, counting under her breath, her tongue slightly between her teeth. She was still in her pajamas, small blue ones with cartoon stars, and her hair was in 2 lopsided braids that she had clearly done herself. She looked up when Victoria appeared. 6.5 scoops, Sophie announced. Daddy likes it strong, but I always do 6.5 because once I did 7 and he made a face. 6.5 sounds right, Victoria said. Do you drink coffee? I do. Do you take anything in it? Just black. Sophie nodded with the approval of someone who considers this the correct answer. Daddy takes his black too. I think that's the grown-up way. She paused. I tried it once. I didn't like it. How old were you? 5. I don't think I was ready. Victoria almost smiled. She pulled out a chair at the kitchen table and sat down, and for a moment she just watched Sophie work. The careful, measuring the small, serious face. The absolute confidence of a child doing a task she had claimed as her own. Sophie, Victoria said. Where's your dad? He went to the truck to get something. He'll be back in a minute. Sophie placed the filter into the coffee maker with ceremony. He was up at 5. He always wakes up early. I don't know why. I think it's an army thing. Probably, Victoria said. Do you know about army things? A little. My dad doesn't talk about it a lot. But sometimes at night if there's a loud noise he gets up really fast. Sophie said this simply without drama, the way children report facts about their parents. Not as something unusual, but as just a true thing about how their world works. I used to be scared of that, but now I know it's just him checking, so I go back to sleep. Victoria looked at the little girl. Something about the way she said it. The quiet matter-of-factness of a 7-year-old who had learned to read her father's nighttime silences and had found a way to feel safe inside them, hit Victoria somewhere she hadn't expected. The back door opened, and Ethan came in carrying a small duffel bag. He set it on the table and looked at Victoria. I called Marcus last night after you went to bed, he said. His girlfriend works the opening shift at a clothing store on 18th. She brought some things over this morning. Should be roughly your size. He unzipped the bag. Nothing fancy but clean. Victoria stared at the bag. You did that last night, she said. You're going to have a long day. You need real clothes. She stopped. She had been CEO of a company for 11 years. People brought her things constantly, assistants, coordinators, handlers. But this was different. This was a man who had thought about a practical problem she had not yet thought about and had solved it without being asked and without expecting anything for solving it. Thank you, Ethan. Coffee's almost ready, Sophie said importantly. I can see that bug. Good work. Sophie beamed and did not try to hide it. Victoria reached into the duffel and pulled out a clean blouse, dark slacks, a pair of flat shoes that were close enough to her size to work. She looked at Ethan. I need to make calls from 7 o'clock, she said. A lot of them. I don't want to take over your kitchen, but I'm going to need— Use whatever you need, he said. I've got a job site at 8, but I can push the morning check-in. Sophie's got school at 8:30. Mrs. Kowalski next door takes her. You don't have to push anything for me. I'm not doing it for you, he said, and then something shifted in his expression, a slight softening. I mean, I'm doing it because it makes sense. You're in the middle of something. An extra hour matters. It does, she admitted. Then don't argue with it. Sophie poured the coffee. She used both hands and her tongue came out again with the effort, and she spilled exactly 3 drops on the counter and looked at them with mild reproach before finding a dish towel and wiping them up without being told. She carried Victoria's mug to the table with the ceremonial gravity of someone presenting a gift. Victoria wrapped her hands around the mug. The heat went all the way through her palms. Sophie, she said. Thank you. You're welcome, Sophie said. I'm going to go get dressed now. I like to pick my own outfits. She paused at the kitchen doorway. I picked a good one yesterday, and nobody even said anything. The dress was great, Ethan said. Sophie pointed at him. Thank you, and disappeared down the hall. The kitchen was quiet for a moment, the specific comfortable quiet of a house where a child has just left the room. She's remarkable, Victoria said. She is. Ethan sat down across from her with his own coffee. What happened overnight? Victoria told him. She kept it clear and concise. The PR director's emailed the 2 journalists the narrative Daniel was constructing. She watched Ethan's face while she talked and noticed that he listened the way he did everything else without performance, without interjecting, without the particular male habit of beginning to formulate his response before you'd finished speaking. He just listened until she was done. He moved within 2 hours of leaving that hotel, Ethan said. He had it ready, Victoria said. The journalist contacts the talking points. He knew last night might go the way it went. He had the contingency prepared. How long has he been building toward this? 18 months on the legal structure. Probably longer on the psychology. He spent 2 years making himself indispensable, making sure the right board members saw him as the stable operational hand. She paused. He's good at what he does. I have to give him that. What's your move? 7 o'clock call with legal and communications. By 9, I need a unified response ready and a direct communication going to every board member, not through channels he has access to directly from me. By noon, I want the documentation package in Martin Cho's hands and 2 other board members who I know aren't compromised. She paused. The board meeting would normally be 3 weeks away. I'm going to push for an emergency session within 72 hours. Ethan was quiet for a moment. That's fast. It has to be. Every hour he has with that narrative is another hour it calcifies. If I let this run 3 weeks, he doesn't need a majority on the board. He just needs enough uncertainty. And if the board doesn't grant the emergency session, then I have a different problem. She said it evenly. But I've been building a board relationship for 11 years, and he's been building one for 3. I like my odds. Ethan looked at her steadily. You're good at this. At crisis management. At not falling apart. She held his gaze. I fell apart a little last night. That's not falling apart, he said. That's being human under extreme pressure. Those are different things. She wanted to look away. She didn't. My father used to say that showing emotion was a form of strategic weakness, she said. He said it enough times that I started to believe it. And I built a whole operating style around it. For 20 years, I was the person who didn't crack. She turned the mug in her hands. Last night in that room in front of 400 people I said, please don't hurt me again. And She stopped. And, Ethan said quietly, and I haven't decided yet whether that was the worst moment of my career or the most honest thing I've said in years. The silence held for a moment. Could be both, Ethan said. She exhaled. Yeah, it could be both. Her phone vibrated on the table. She looked at the screen. Marcus Chen, her outside counsel in New York. 6:22 a.m. I have to take this, she said. Go, he said. She picked up the phone and walked to the back of the kitchen. Marcus, tell me something good. The injunction is ready to file, Marcus said. We can have it in front of a judge by 10 a.m. But Victoria, I need you to understand the moment we file it's public. There's no soft play after that. I know. He's going to respond hard. He's already got Kellerman Shaw on retainer. I found that out an hour ago. That's a 40-person litigation team. I know what Kellerman Shaw is, Marcus. I'm telling you this is going to get ugly in the press before it gets clean. You need to be ready for that. I've been ready for 6 weeks. File it. A pause. You're sure? Marcus, file the injunction. Okay. She could hear him writing. One more thing. I had someone do a quiet check on the financial filings he altered. Victoria. There's more than we originally found. He didn't just restructure the equity architecture. There are 3 charitable foundation tie-ins that run money through a shell company back to a private account. If that holds up under audit, we're not just talking about a corporate power grab. The kitchen went very still around her. Say that again, she said. Marcus said it again. She stood at the back of the kitchen with her coffee cooling in her hand, and for a moment she saw the full shape of what Daniel had built, not just the mechanism to take control, but the financial system running underneath it. Not just ambition. Fraud. Potentially criminal fraud, the kind that didn't just end careers, but ended in courtrooms. How solid is the evidence, she said. Solid enough that I'm going to recommend we send a summary to the FBI Financial Crimes Division simultaneously with the injunction filing. Do it, she said. Send me everything. She hung up. Ethan was watching her from across the kitchen. He had not pretended not to listen. It's worse than I thought, she said. How much worse? The kind of worse that changes what kind of case this is. He nodded once, said nothing, waited. I spent 9 years trusting that man, she said. Not with emotion, with a kind of flat wonder like someone turning over a rock and being genuinely surprised by what moved underneath it. 9 years. Smart people get misled by smart people, Ethan said. That's not a character flaw. That's just what it costs to trust someone. It's going to cost a lot more than that before this is over. Probably, he said. But you know what you're dealing with now. That's worth something. She looked at him. In the clear morning light of a kitchen in Pilsen, with the sound of Sophie's footsteps overhead, as she apparently tried on and rejected several outfit options. Victoria saw Ethan Miller clearly, for possibly the first time, not as the man who had stepped between her and Daniel, not as the unexpected safe harbor, but as himself. The steadiness in him was not performed. It was structural the way a well-built wall is steady, not because nothing has hit it, but because what has hit it has made it more solid rather than less. Why are you being this kind to me? She asked. He considered the question seriously, the way he seemed to consider everything. Because you needed it, he said. And because I could. That's usually enough reason. Most people need a better reason than that. Most people are waiting for a reason they feel good about, he said. I just do the thing in front of me. She was quiet for a moment. What's the thing in front of you right now? Making sure you eat something before your 7 o'clock call, he said, and stood up and opened the refrigerator with the complete lack of drama of a man moving from one practical task to the next. She sat back down at the table. From upstairs, Sophie's voice called, Daddy, do these match? I can't see them bug. They're both blue, but one is more blue. Wear the more blue one. A pause. That's what I was going to do anyway. Then why did you ask? A longer pause. I wanted to see if you'd say something different. Ethan looked at the ceiling with the expression of a man who has had this particular kind of conversation many times and has made peace with it. Victoria covered her mouth with her hand. She was absurdly laughing again, silently this time, her shoulders shaking. She tests you, Victoria said. Every day, Ethan said. He pulled eggs from the refrigerator and set a pan on the stove with the ease of someone performing a familiar routine. You want eggs. You don't have to. It's eggs, he said. It takes 4 minutes. Say yes or no. Yes, she said. He cooked. She drank her coffee and answered 3 emails and declined 2 calls from numbers she didn't recognize, journalists almost certainly, and thought about the shape of the day ahead. At 6:55, she went to the bathroom to change into the clothes from the duffel and came back looking more like herself, which is to say, looking like the CEO she was, which is to say, looking like the armor was back on. Ethan noticed. He set a plate in front of her without comment. Sophie came downstairs at 7:02 in a blue dress that was objectively the correct choice, and sat down and ate toast with the cheerful efficiency of a child who has a schedule she takes seriously. At 7 exactly, Victoria's call connected. She moved to the small living room with her plate balanced in one hand and her phone in the other. And for the next 55 minutes, she ran the call with the precision of someone who has prepared for exactly this moment and knows every piece of the board and every move that needs to happen in what sequence. She did not stumble once. By 7:55, the injunction was filed. The board documentation was packaged and ready for delivery. 3 direct communications had gone out to board members through secure channels. A single public statement, measured, specific, and devastating in its factual detail, was drafted and set to release at noon. She came back to the kitchen. Sophie had gone to school. Ethan was washing the dishes. Done, he said without turning around. First phase, she said. The rest of the day is going to be... I know, he said. I need to get back to my office. I need to be physically there by noon. I'll drive you. Ethan. Victoria. He turned around and looked at her with the particular directness she was beginning to recognize as just how he looked at things. I'll drive you. It's not a complicated offer. She stopped arguing. She had spent 20 years arguing with every offer of help she received, parsing the motive behind it, calculating the cost. This man seemed to have no motive she could identify, and she was beginning to understand that was not naivety on his part. It was simply a different way of moving through the world. Okay, she said. We leave in 20 minutes. That gives you time to finish eating. She looked at her plate. She had forgotten it. She sat down and ate, and for 5 minutes she didn't think about Daniel Whitmore, or the injunction, or the board, or the FBI referral, or the public statement. She just ate eggs in a kitchen in Pilsen with Chicago morning light coming through the window and the sound of the city starting its day outside. It was the most ordinary 5 minutes she could remember in years. And it mattered more than she would have expected. They were in Ethan's truck 10 minutes into the drive toward the loop when her phone rang. Not a number she'd declined. Martin Cho, she answered. Victoria. His voice was different from the night before. The shame was still there, but underneath it was something more energized. I've been awake since 4 in the morning. I need you to know I've been making calls. What kind of calls? The kind that matter. Diane Forsyth, Robert Kimani, Ellen Park. 3 of the 7 board members who I know for certain have not been approached by Daniel's people. A pause. Ellen is furious. Robert said, and I'm quoting, "If this documentation shows what you're telling me, it shows we don't need an emergency session. We need an emergency removal." Victoria felt something she hadn't felt since this whole thing began. Something that was not strategy and not discipline and not practiced composure. Something warmer than all of those. Martin, she said. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, he said. This is going to be a brutal week, but I want you to know what you said to me last night, on the phone, about deciding what kind of person I want to be. A pause. That's what kept me up. Good, she said. I'll have the 3 of them on a call with you by 2 o'clock this afternoon, if you can be available. I'll be available. She hung up. Ethan had been driving. He had not looked at her while she was on the phone, not in the obvious listening way. But she had noticed in her peripheral vision that his hands on the wheel had relaxed slightly while she was talking, some form of response to her tone, to the change in her voice as the call progressed. Something shifted, he said. 3 board members, she said. Maybe 4. Martin Cho spent the night making calls. The one who didn't move last night. Yes. Ethan was quiet for a moment. People sometimes need a night, he said, to figure out what they can live with. He could have moved in the moment. He didn't, Ethan said. And he's going to have to live with that. But he moved this morning. I think that still counts for something. She looked at him. You give people a lot of grace. I try to, he said. Doesn't always come easy. When doesn't it come easy? The question landed in the truck, and he was quiet for longer than usual before he answered. When they hurt someone who can't fight back, he said. That's when I run out of grace pretty fast. She understood without him saying it that they were not entirely talking about last night. Sophie's mom, she said carefully. Not a question. A door she was leaving open or closed depending on him. He kept his eyes on the road. She left when Sophie was 2, he said. Wasn't equipped for it. The deployment cycles, the PTSD. I wasn't managing well, He stopped. Started again. I don't blame her for leaving. I wasn't easy to live with then. But Sophie? He paused. Sophie was 2, and she had no say in it. And that's the part where I run out of grace. Victoria sat with that for a moment. How did you manage, she said. Badly at first, he said without self-pity. Then better. Then I found the construction work, the affordable housing project started as a weekend volunteer thing and became a full operation. Gave me something to build. Something concrete. A slight pause. Literally concrete. And Sophie. He exhaled. Sophie decided very early that she was going to be fine, and she mostly pulled me along with her. She pulled you along. She's 7 years old, and she has more forward motion than most people I've ever known, he said. I don't think I gave her that. I think she just came that way. Victoria thought about the small girl on the step stool, measuring coffee grounds with absolute seriousness. 6.5 scoops. The note taped to the guest room wall. The first aid kit with the 2 purple bandages being saved for if it's really bad. She did the braids herself this morning, Victoria said. She's been doing her own hair since she was 5, Ethan said. I tried to teach myself, watched about 47 YouTube videos. I was terrible at it. She looked at me one day and said, Daddy, I love you, but this is not working, and took over. Victoria laughed, a real one, open and unguarded. She's right, she said. She's almost always right, Ethan said. It's humbling. They were coming into the loop. Now the city thickening around them, the tall glass of downtown catching the morning sun. Victoria looked at her building through the windshield. 42 floors, Hayes Technology Group logo on the exterior. The building she had walked into confidently for 11 years, and now approached with the knowledge that somewhere inside it, the war she'd been preparing for had officially begun. Ethan pulled to the curb. He put the truck in park and turned to look at her. You ready for this? He said. She thought about the honest answer. No, she said, but I'm ready enough. He nodded. That was enough for him, ready enough. He didn't push it toward more than it was. Victoria, he said. She had her hand on the door. She turned back. Whatever happens in there today, he said, you already won the part that mattered. She looked at him. What part? You decided not to sign, he said. Everything else is just how the deciding plays out. She held that for a moment. Then she said, Thank you, Ethan, for... She paused. For all of it. Let me know how the day goes, he said. Not as a request. As an offer, quiet and without obligation. I will, she said. She got out of the truck. She straightened her jacket. She walked through the front door of her building with her head up and her documents under her arm, and the particular walk of a woman who has decided exactly who she is and is no longer confused about it. At the security desk, the morning guard, a man named Carl, who had worked the lobby for 6 years and who had never once seen Victoria Hayes come in without her assistant ahead of her and a coffee in her hand, looked up with visible surprise. Ms. Hayes, good morning. Good morning, Carl, she said. Is Renata Cruz already upstairs? Yes, ma'am. Got in about 6:30. Anyone else I should know about? Carl paused. The pause told her everything. Mr. Whitmore came in at 6, he said carefully. He's on the 37th floor. Not his floor. The conference room floor, where the board met. She absorbed this. "Thank you, Carl," she said, and walked to the elevator. She pressed 37. If Daniel Whitmore wanted to make this the floor where it ended, then this would be the floor where it ended. The elevator rose. 34. 35. 36. Her phone buzzed. A message from a number she didn't have saved. She opened it. 3 words, no signature you should have signed. She stared at the message as the elevator reached 37. The doors opened. Daniel was standing in the corridor 15 feet away in a perfectly pressed suit with 2 men she recognized as Kellerman Shaw attorneys, flanking him like furniture. He had a coffee in one hand, and the expression of a man who had decided the night to sleep on things had clarified everything in his favor. He looked at her across the corridor. She looked at him. Neither of them spoke for 3 full seconds. Then Victoria Hayes walked forward, and her voice when she spoke was not loud, not theatrical, not the voice of a person in crisis. It was the voice of a person who has been underestimated one time too many and is done accommodating it. "Daniel," she said. "The injunction was filed at 10 minutes to 8 this morning. The board documentation is in the hands of 4 members as of an hour ago. The FBI financial crimes referral was submitted simultaneously." She stopped walking when she was 6 feet from him. "If your attorneys are here to negotiate, I'm listening. If they're here to threaten me, they should know that there is nothing you can take from me now that changes what's already in motion." The Kellerman Shaw attorneys exchanged a look she caught clearly. Daniel's face did not move. For a moment, just a moment, she saw something behind the composure. Not fear, not shame. Something smaller and more honest than either the specific expression of a man who has played a game for 18 months with absolute confidence and has arrived at the board to find the table has been cleared. "You've made a mistake," he said. "We'll let the board decide that," she said. "In the emergency session I've requested for Thursday." She looked at him steadily. "Are you going to be there, Daniel?" He said nothing. She walked past him to the conference room at the end of the hall, knocked twice and opened the door. Renata Cruz and 2 members of her legal team looked up from a table covered in documents. "Tell me where we are," Victoria said, and closed the door behind her. The war formally had begun, and for the first time in 18 months, Victoria Hayes was fighting it on her own terms. The conference room on the 37th floor smelled like burnt coffee and tension. It was 8:14 in the morning. Renata Cruz was the kind of woman who processed crisis through motion. She had been up since 3 a.m., and it showed in the precise way she had organized every document on that table, color-coded and stacked in the specific order of battle, the way a surgeon lays out instruments before an operation. She looked up when Victoria walked in, and the first thing she said was not hello. "He's been busy," Renata said. "Busy all night." "Tell me exactly what we're dealing with," Victoria said, and sat down. Renata pulled a printed sheet from the top of her stack and slid it across the table. It was a media log, every outlet that had published or posted something about last night's incident at the Harrington Grand time-stamped from 11 p.m. forward. There were 14 entries. Victoria read them in 40 seconds. Most of them were variations on the same theme. Victoria Hayes under pressure from a prolonged period of strategic uncertainty at Hayes Technology Group had suffered a visible emotional episode at a major industry event. Sources close to the company expressed concern about her recent decision-making patterns. COO Daniel Whitmore had reportedly been attempting to address critical operational gaps when the situation escalated. One outlet, a financial blog with 140,000 subscribers, had already run the phrase "fitness to lead" in its headline. Victoria set the sheet down. "He fed them the language," she said. "Fitness to lead. That's not journalism, that's a legal strategy wrapped in a news cycle. Kellerman Shaw has used this exact playbook in 3 other corporate displacement cases in the last 5 years," said the man to Renata's left, a younger attorney named David Park, from her outside counsel's Chicago office, who had the tired, alert energy of someone who had driven in from the suburbs at 5 a.m. and was running entirely on professional obligation. "We've been studying it since Marcus called last night. They establish the instability narrative first, then they use it in the boardroom to justify an interim leadership vote." "How long before it becomes the dominant story?" Victoria asked. 12 hours from now if we don't move, David said. Maybe 16. After that it's correction journalism, which is always weaker than the original story. Then we have until 8 tonight to change the story, Victoria said. What's ready? Renata put a second sheet on the table. The public statement is tight, factual, no emotion specific about the legal filings. It names the injunction, references the FBI referral without detail, and establishes your leadership position as active and uncompromised. She paused. It's good, Victoria. It's the right tone. When does it go? We were thinking noon. Move it to 10, Victoria said. We don't give him 2 hours to keep building. Renata and David exchanged a look. Moving it to 10 means we need legal sign-off in the next 30 minutes, David said. Then you have 29 minutes, Victoria said. David picked up his phone and walked to the corner of the room. Renata leaned forward. Victoria. Her voice dropped. Not because anyone could hear them, but because what she was about to say was the kind of thing that required a smaller register. I need to ask you something, and I need a straight answer. Ask it. Last night the things you said in front of all those people, the please don't hurt me, the again. She held Victoria's gaze. Is there something I need to know? Something beyond what's in the documents. Victoria was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. He never hurt me physically before last night, she said. The again was about something older, something personal that has nothing to do with this case. She kept her voice level. But the wrist is documented. Hotel security cameras, multiple witness phones, and I had a physician look at it this morning. She pushed back her sleeve. The bruise had deepened overnight, a clear band of purple and red above the wrist bone. Renata looked at it. That goes in the record, she said quietly. It's already in the record, Victoria said. Renata sat back. Something moved in her expression, not professional assessment, but something more personal. The look of a woman who had worked alongside Victoria Hayes for 6 years and was seeing something she hadn't been allowed to see before. I didn't know he had that in him. Neither did I, Victoria said. That's the part that keeps me up. Not the legal battle, not the public narrative. The fact that she had been in a room with a man 400 times in 9 years and had not seen this particular truth about him until the moment it was too late to matter. David came back from the corner. Legal sign-off in 20 minutes. 10 o'clock is doable. Make it happen, Victoria said. Her phone buzzed on the table. She looked at the screen. Not a number she recognized, a 312 area code, Chicago local. She let it go to voicemail, then picked it up 30 seconds later when the voicemail notification appeared. She listened to the message. Her face did not change while she listened, but something behind her eyes went very still. She set the phone down. That was Ellen Park, she said. Board member. She wants to meet before the 2 o'clock call. A pause. She said she needs to tell me something in person, that she doesn't trust the phones. Renata frowned. Ellen Park has been on your board for 4 years. She's never... I know, Victoria said. Which means she has something specific. She stood. Set the 2 o'clock call for 3. I'm meeting Ellen at 11. She was almost at the door when it opened from the other side. One of the Kellerman Shaw attorneys stood in the doorway. He was younger than Victoria had expected, mid-30s, in a suit that was too careful for someone who actually felt confident. He held an envelope. Ms. Hayes, I've been asked to deliver this directly. She took the envelope. She did not open it immediately. She looked at the attorney. Tell me something, she said. And you don't have to answer, but I'm going to ask anyway. How long have you been doing this kind of work? He blinked. I'm not... Specifically this, she said. Not the law, this. Coming into a situation where someone is being pushed out of something they built and carrying the envelope. He said nothing. 4 or 5 years, she said, reading his face the way she read everything. Long enough to be good at it, not long enough to have stopped thinking about it. She held up the envelope. Tell Daniel I'll have a response through my own counsel. She handed it back. And next time you're in this situation, ask yourself whether you're carrying the envelope for the right person. I took it. He left without speaking. But she had seen something in his face in the last 3 seconds, something that was not quite doubt and not quite shame, but lived in the same neighborhood as both. Renata looked at her when the door closed. "Was that necessary?" she said. "Yes," Victoria said simply. "Not for the case, for him." She pulled out her own phone and sent a text. Not to Marcus, not to legal. To the number she had saved last night under a single name, Ethan. She typed, "Day is moving. Complicated, but moving. Thanks Sophie for the coffee." She put the phone in her pocket and went to find out what Ellen Park needed to say in person. It was 8:47 in the morning. The war was 11 hours old. Ellen Park was 62 years old. A former state appellate judge turned tech board director who had the particular bearing of a woman who had spent decades in courtrooms and had learned that the most powerful thing you can do in a room is be quieter than everyone else and wait. She was waiting at a corner table in a coffee shop 4 blocks from Victoria's building when Victoria walked in at 11:03. She did not stand. She looked at Victoria's wrist. "Sit down," she said. Victoria sat. "I'm going to tell you 3 things," Ellen said. "In order. And I need you to let me finish each one before you respond." "Go ahead." "First thing." Ellen wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. 6 weeks ago, Daniel Whitmore invited me to dinner. I thought it was routine. It was not. Over the course of that dinner, he made it very clear without using language that could be described as threatening. In a legal sense, that my continued position on the board was contingent on my support for what he called a strategic leadership transition. A pause. He showed me documents. He told me Victoria Hayes was planning to take the company private in a way that would dilute current board compensation. He said he was acting to protect the company's interests. Victoria kept her face still. "Second thing," Ellen continued, "I believed him. For approximately 4 weeks I believed him. Because the documents he showed me looked legitimate, and because I have known Daniel Whitmore in a professional context for 7 years, and because—" She stopped, collected herself. "Because I wanted to believe that what I was being asked to do was the right thing, and not what it actually was." "What changed your mind?" Victoria said. 2 nights ago, Ellen said. "Before the event last night, I had dinner with a friend, a securities attorney who has no connection to Hayes Technology Group. I described the documents Daniel had shown me without names as a hypothetical. She told me that the structure I was describing sounded like a fraudulent restructuring designed to appear like shareholder protection while actually serving one person's private interests." Ellen looked directly at Victoria. "I went home that night and couldn't sleep. And then I watched the video of what happened in that ballroom." Victoria said nothing. "Third thing," Ellen said. Her voice changed, not softer exactly, but more direct, the way a judge's voice gets when they're about to say the part that matters. "The documents he showed me, I photographed them on my phone at dinner because I have a habit of documenting everything. I have those photographs. I sent them to your outside counsel at 7 this morning." A pause. "They are not the same as the documents in your legal filing, Victoria. They are different documents, which means he has been running 2 separate sets of false materials simultaneously." The coffee shop noise continued around them. Someone's espresso machine ran. A barista called a name. Ordinary sounds over an extraordinary sentence. Victoria processed it. 2 sets of documents. Not a single fabrication. A parallel architecture. 1 set to manipulate the board. 1 set to manipulate the legal and ownership structure. Both constructed over the same period. Both pointing in the same direction. "He built 2 engines," Victoria said quietly, "in case one failed." "Yes," Ellen said. "How many other board members did he approach the way he approached you?" Ellen was quiet for a moment. "I don't know for certain, but based on conversations at last night's event before everything happened, I suspect at least 2 others, possibly 3. Victoria sat with that number. 5 of 7 board members potentially compromised. Martin Cho had come back, that was 1 recovered. Ellen herself, sitting across this table, that was 2. But if he had approached 5 with that level of preparation, the ones who had stayed in his pocket were dug in deep. "I need to know who," Victoria said. "I'm working on it," Ellen said. I've made 2 calls this morning already. Carefully. What do you need from me? I need you to not publicly name me until I tell you it's safe to do so, Ellen said. Because if he knows I've turned, he will move to accelerate the timeline. He has a play ready, I'm certain of it, for exactly the contingency of losing board members. What play? I don't know the specifics. Ellen held her gaze. But at dinner he said one thing that I've been thinking about since this morning. He said, the beauty of this structure is that it doesn't require a majority vote to trigger. It only requires a specific condition. Victoria felt the sentence land in her chest like cold water. A specific condition, not a vote. A condition embedded in the corporate documents themselves, in the altered filings, in the restructured equity architecture. A legal tripwire that could activate without the board's consent if the conditions were met. What condition? Victoria said. I don't know, Ellen said. That's the part I can't answer. Victoria picked up her phone, dialed Marcus directly. He answered on the first ring. I need you to go back through every document in the restructuring package, she said without preamble. Not the ownership structure, the triggering conditions. There is a specific clause or condition embedded in these filings that activates independently of a board vote. Find it. A pause on the line. Victoria, that could be anywhere in... I know. Find it anyway. I need it before 3 o'clock. She hung up. Ellen was watching her. You're good at moving fast, Ellen said. I've had to be, Victoria said. My whole career, I've been in rooms where everyone expected me to be slower, softer, less certain. I learned early that speed was one of the few advantages I could build that they couldn't take away. Daniel underestimated that, Ellen said. Most people do, Victoria said. Until they don't. She left the coffee shop at 11:37, walked back toward her building with her phone already to her ear, and thought about the tripwire. Whatever condition Daniel had built into those documents, he had not disclosed it to anyone who was now in her camp. Which meant it was the piece he trusted most. Which meant it was the piece most likely to be catastrophic if it triggered. She had until 3 o'clock. She had 90 minutes. It was 1:48 p.m. when Marcus called back. Victoria was in the 37th floor conference room with Renata David and 2 additional attorneys who had driven in from the New York office and looked like they had been awake since the previous Tuesday. The table was covered in printed pages that had been annotated in 3 different colors of ink. I found it, Marcus said. The room went quiet. Tell me, Victoria said. It's in the amended partnership renewal agreement. The one that was supposed to be signed last night. He paused. There's a clause buried in Section 14, subsection F, that stipulates that if the primary signatory fails to execute the agreement within the specified window and does not provide written notice of objection through official board channels. Within 48 hours of the deadline, the agreement is considered constructively accepted under the framework of the 2019 Operational Continuity Resolution. Victoria stared at the wall. The 2019 resolution, she said slowly, which was a board resolution passed to protect operational continuity during your father's illness, Marcus said. It gave the COO emergency signing authority under specific conditions. Daniel drafted that resolution himself. He was COO at the time. The room was absolutely silent. David Park said very quietly. He didn't need her signature at all. He built a mechanism that would activate automatically if she didn't formally object through board channels in 48 hours. When does the 48-hour window close? Victoria said. The event was scheduled for 7 p.m., Marcus said. 48 hours from 7 p.m. last night. Victoria looked at the clock on the wall. 7 p.m. last night. 48 hours. 7 p.m. tonight. We have 5 hours and 12 minutes, Victoria said. The room absorbed this. Then Renata Cruz, who had been in communications for 22 years and prided herself on never raising her voice, said, with complete controlled intensity, "Tell me we can file the formal board objection in time. The objection has to go through official board channels," David said, typing on his laptop with both hands. "That means the board secretary's office time-stamped with counter-signature from at least 2 board members acknowledging receipt." "Martin Cho," Victoria said immediately. "And Ellen Park," Renata said. Ellen hasn't gone public yet. She doesn't have to go public, Victoria said. She just has to countersign a board document. That's internal. That's clean. She was already texting. Get me Martin on the phone in 5 minutes. Get Ellen on the phone in 6. David looked up from his laptop. Victoria, there's one more thing. Something in his voice made the room still again. The board secretary's office, he said. The current acting board secretary is Patricia Wills. Renata closed her eyes briefly. Victoria said, Who does Patricia Wills report to? Operationally, she reports to the COO's office, David said. Daniel restructured board administration 18 months ago. Patricia Wills processes all formal board communications through a system that Daniel's team has administrative access to. The silence lasted 4 seconds. He controls the filing system, Victoria said. He has administrative access to it, David said carefully. Which means a filing submitted through standard channels could be delayed, flagged for review, or conveniently time-stamped after 7 p.m. tonight, Renata said flatly. Victoria stood. She walked to the window. Not to look at anything, to move, to give her mind the physical motion it needed to work through what she was seeing. Hai had not just built a legal mechanism. He had built a delivery system. A mechanism that would activate automatically, and a filing system that he could slow down long enough for the clock to run out. Even if she filed the objection with the right documents and the right signatures, he could potentially delay its processing until after the deadline. The elegance of it was almost breathtaking. She stood at the window for 32 seconds. She knew because she counted. Then she turned around. David, she said, is there any provision under Illinois corporate law for filing a board objection directly with the state corporate registry rather than through internal board channels? David's hands paused on his keyboard. He looked up at her. Yes, he said slowly. Under the 2018 amendments to the Illinois Business Corporation Act, in cases where there is reasonable documented concern about the integrity of internal corporate communication channels, a party can file a formal objection directly with the Secretary of State's office, and it carries equivalent legal weight to an internal board filing. Has anyone ever actually done that? In Illinois once, in a case in 2021. He paused. But the law is clear. Then we file with the Secretary of State, Victoria said. Not Patricia Wills, not the board secretary's office, directly with the state. We need the objection document drafted, executed, and filed before 5 o'clock, because the Secretary of State's office closes. I know what time state offices close, David, Victoria said. How long to draft it? 30 minutes if I start now. Start now. He started now. Martin Cho answered on the second ring. He listened to Victoria explain what she needed in 2 minutes flat, asked 2 questions, and said yes to both without hesitation. The shame from the night before had apparently completed its transformation into something more useful. He sounded like a man who had decided to stop calculating and start moving. Ellen Park. When Victoria reached her, went quiet for a moment, when she understood what the countersignature meant, that it would make her position officially part of the record. Then she said, Send me the document. It'll be ready in 30 minutes. I'll be waiting. It was 2:19 in the afternoon. Victoria walked out of the conference room, down the hall, and into her private office for the first time since this morning. She sat at her desk. Her desk. The one she had sat at for 11 years, the one her father had sat at before that, the one with a faint scratch on the lower left corner where she had accidentally dragged a filing box across it on her first week and had never gotten around to having it refinished because she had decided it was honest and imperfection that was real. She sat in the chair that was hers. And for 30 seconds, she let herself feel the full weight of what was happening. Not as strategy, not as problem solving, as something human and heavy and real. 9 years of trust dismantled. An empire built on her father's sacrifice and her own decade of grinding labor, targeted by someone who had sat across from her in rooms like this, and smiled and pretended to care about the same things she cared about. 30 seconds. She allowed herself exactly 30 seconds. Then she picked up the phone and called the one person she hadn't called yet today. Ethan answered on the third ring. There was noise in the background, the particular sound of an active construction site voices, calling across distance the rhythmic percussion of work. "Hold on," he said. A pause. The background noise dropped. "Sorry, are you okay?" "I need to ask you something," she said. "Ask it. If someone came after your construction business today, not symbolically, not as a vague threat, actually came after it. Permits pulled, contracts threatened, your funding sources pressured. What would you do?" A pause, not a long one. "Why are you asking me this right now?" he said. "Because I think he's going to do it," she said. "Not because you're central to the case. Because hurting you is the cleanest way to send me a message that he can reach anywhere." The silence on the other end of the line had weight to it. "Let him try," Ethan said. Not aggressive, not performative. The same matter-of-fact steadiness as everything else he said. "My permits are clean. My contracts are with the city and the county. My funding comes from 3 community development organizations that have been around longer than Daniel Whitmore has been in business. He has political connections. So do I," Ethan said. "Different kind. I've been building affordable housing in Pilsen for 4 years. I know every alderman, every community board member, every nonprofit director from here to Bronzeville. That's not the same as corporate connections, but it's real." A pause. "Victoria, I'm not fragile, and I'm not easy to threaten." She exhaled. "I know," she said. "I know you're not. I needed to hear it." "You needed to know you hadn't pulled me into something that was going to break me," he said. The accuracy of it caught her off guard. "Yes. I'm not broken that easily," he said. "And you didn't pull me into anything. I walked in." She pressed her fingers against the scratch on the corner of her desk. "How's Sophie?" she said. "Fine. She came home from school and told me she told her whole class about the lady in the blue dress." I'm not sure how much of the story she told, but based on the level of detail she usually provides, probably all of it. Despite everything, despite the injunction and the tripwire, and the 5-hour deadline, and the weight of 11 years pressing down on her. Victoria laughed. Not the short, surprised laugh from last night, but something fuller, something that ran from her chest all the way out. "She told her whole class," Victoria said. "She said you were brave," Ethan said. "Her words. I didn't coach it." The words landed somewhere precise and undefended. "I'll call you tonight," Victoria said. "When it's done." "I'll be up," he said. It was 2:41 p.m. The Secretary of State filing document was ready at 3:11. David Park had written it in 31 minutes, which was 1 minute slower than his estimate, and he apologized for this in the specific way of a person who takes their own timeline seriously. Victoria read it in 4 minutes, made 2 small corrections, and signed it. Martin Cho's counter-signature came in electronically at 3:23. Ellen Park's at 3:31. At 3:39 p.m. David Park walked into the Illinois Secretary of State's Business Services office with 3 printed copies of the document and a flash drive containing the digital version and filed it in person. He photographed the time-stamped receipt with his phone and sent the image to Victoria at 3:42. She looked at the timestamp. 3:39 p.m. 3 hours and 21 minutes before Daniel's mechanism would have activated. She forwarded the receipt to Marcus, to Renata, and to Martin Cho. Then she sat for a moment. The tripwire had been cut. The clock had stopped. The legal mechanism. Daniel had spent 18 months constructing the parallel document sets, the board, manipulation, the controlled filing system, the 48-hour automatic activation. All of it had just been neutralized by a provision of Illinois corporate law that he had apparently not accounted for. Or had accounted for and dismissed as too obscure to be found in time. He had underestimated her. Again, she was still sitting at her desk when her phone rang. Unknown number, Chicago local. She answered it. "Ms. Hayes." A man's voice she didn't recognize. Professional, careful. "My name is Special Agent Robert Tran, FBI Financial Crimes Division. I'm calling because we received a referral this morning from your outside counsel regarding potential financial fraud connected to Hayes Technology Group. We've been reviewing it for the past 6 hours." A pause. "I'd like to schedule an in-person meeting at your earliest convenience. What we found in our initial review goes beyond the referral material. Victoria was very still. How far beyond? She said. I'd prefer to discuss specifics in person, Agent Tran said. But I want you to understand this is not a preliminary inquiry. We opened a formal investigation at 2 p.m. this afternoon. She closed her eyes for 1 second. Tomorrow morning, she said. 8 a.m. My attorney will be present. We'll see you then, Agent Tran said. She hung up. A formal FBI investigation. Opened today. Moving faster than even her best-case scenario had projected, which meant that what Marcus had sent them was not just strong enough to justify a referral, it was strong enough to justify immediate action. Daniel Whitmore had not just built a corporate mechanism to take control of her company. He had built something large enough and dark enough that the FBI had opened a case file in 6 hours. She thought about the 9 years, the dinners, the planning sessions, the times he had sat across from her and said with apparent sincerity that he was proud of what they had built together. She thought about the documents she had read alone in her office 6 weeks ago. The ones that first showed her what he had been constructing underneath the surface of everything they had built together. She had spent 6 weeks preparing for a corporate battle. She was now in something considerably larger. Her door opened without a knock, which meant it was Renata, because Renata was the only person in the building who opened her door without knocking when she had information that couldn't wait. He left the building, Renata said. When? 20 minutes ago. Security logged it. He took his personal files from his office 2 boxes and left with the Kellerman Shaw attorneys. She paused. Victoria. He pulled his company laptop from the IT system remotely, initiated a wipe. Victoria stood. Lock every system he has access to, she said. Right now. IT, legal files, board, communications, financial platforms. Everything. Don't give him 30 more minutes to pull anything else. Already in motion, Renata said. I called IT when security flagged the laptop wipe. They locked everything 40 seconds ago. Victoria looked at her. You beat me to it. By about 4 seconds, Renata said. I figured you were on a call. Something passed between them. 2 women who had worked together for 6 years, who had maintained a professional distance that was appropriate and functional, feeling that distance compress into something more honest. Renata, Victoria said. Thank you. Not just for today. For all of it. Renata held her gaze for a moment. Don't get emotional on me, Victoria. We've still got a lot of day left. I know, Victoria said. I'm serious. You can get emotional at 7:01 p.m. 7:01, Victoria said. Noted. It was 5:22 in the afternoon when the second wave hit. A major financial news outlet published a story at 5:22 p.m. that was not the instability narrative Daniel had planted. It was a different story entirely sourced to 2 anonymous board members and a former Hayes Technology Group senior vice president who had left the company 18 months ago under what the story described as disputed circumstances. The headline read, Hayes Technology, COO, under federal investigation for alleged corporate fraud. Not a leak from her side. She was certain of that Marcus had been explicit about managing the federal referral quietly. This was someone on Daniel's side breaking. An attorney. A board contact. Someone who had looked at what was coming and decided that getting ahead of it was better than being buried by it. Or Daniel himself, she thought. Making one final move to control the story before the story controlled him. The story was mostly accurate. It described the financial restructuring in general terms, referenced the SEC filing implications, mentioned the FBI referral. It did not name Ellen Park or Martin Cho. It used the phrase alleged throughout with the mechanical frequency of attorneys' careful instructions. Victoria's phone began ringing immediately. She did not answer any of them. She stood at the window of her office, her building, her company, and watched the city doing what it always did, which was nothing. Continuing its enormous indifferent motion, without reference to the battle on the 37th floor, or the man who had just had his exit from the building, logged by security, with 2 boxes of files under his arm. Her phone showed a text message from an unknown number. She opened it. 4 words. You will regret this. She looked at the message for a long moment. Then she typed back 3 words and sent them and put her phone face down on her desk. The 3 words were, "I already don't." At 6:49 p.m., 11 minutes before 7 o'clock, Victoria Hayes sat alone in her office with a cold cup of coffee and a table full of documents that had, over the course of one very long day, become the foundation of something she had not entirely anticipated. Not just a legal case, not just a corporate defense, a reckoning with what she had built, how she had built it, who she had trusted, and why. A reckoning with the version of herself who had run so far and so fast toward success that she had not noticed until a man in work boots stepped between her and something ugly, that she had left certain essential things behind. She had not cried today. She was not going to cry today. But she sat for a moment with something she couldn't quite name, a heaviness that was not grief and not defeat, but something between them and underneath both. The specific exhaustion of a person who has been strong in exactly the right ways for exactly the right reasons, and now needs very briefly to stop. At 7:01 p.m. Renata Cruz knocked on the door, opened it, and said, "It's 7:01. Victoria looked at her. Renata's expression said, "I gave you a deadline for a reason." Victoria's expression said, "I know." "Go home," Victoria said. "Both of us. Same time tomorrow." "Agreed." Renata paused in the doorway. "For what it's worth. Today was as you were exceptional today." "We were exceptional today," Victoria said. Renata almost smiled. "Tomorrow we'll argue about who deserves more credit. Tonight I'm going to eat an entire pizza and sleep for 9 hours." "That sounds right," Victoria said. She picked up her phone and called Ethan. He answered on the second ring. "It's done," she said. "Tell me," he said. She told him. All of it, the tripwire, the Secretary of State, filing the FBI call. The story breaking at 5:22. Daniel leaving the building with 2 boxes. She told it in order and without dramatizing it, and he listened the way he always listened all the way through to the end. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Sophie made dinner," he said. She blinked. "What?" "She made dinner. She insists it counts as dinner. It's grilled cheese and tomato soup from a can, but she made the sandwiches herself, and she wants you to know she used the good cheese." Victoria sat at her desk on the 37th floor of a building with her name on it, and felt something happen in her chest that was warm and clean and had nothing to do with strategy. "The good cheese," she said. "The orange kind," Ethan said. "She considers it superior." "Tell her thank you," Victoria said. "Tell her I—" She stopped. "Is the offer still open? The guest room with the window?" A pause. "It never closed," Ethan said. She picked up her bag. She turned off the light in her office. She walked to the elevator. Outside, the city was lit up and moving and enormous. The way cities are at night when you are small in them and grateful, not defeated. She walked through the lobby past Carl at the security desk, who said good night and meant it, and out through the glass doors into the Chicago evening air, which was cool and real and smelled like the city, which smelled like everything all at once. A familiar truck was parked at the curb. She stopped. Ethan was leaning against the driver's side with his hands in his pockets, and the particular stillness of a man who is simply where he said he would be. "I told you I'd call when it was done," she said. "You did," he said. "And then you drove over anyway." "Sophie said you shouldn't have to take a cab," he said. "After today." Victoria looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Sophie is 7 years old." "I'm aware, and she already makes better decisions than most of the people I've worked with for a decade." "Don't tell her that," Ethan said. "Her ego is already operating at full capacity." Victoria got in the truck. Ethan got in the driver's side. The engine turned over with the particular honest sound of a vehicle that works because it is maintained, not because it is new. As they pulled into traffic, Victoria looked out the window at the city sliding past the lights, the motion, the beautiful indifference of it all, and felt for the second morning in a row that she was in exactly the right place. Not the safe place, the right place. Behind them on the 37th floor, in a locked and darkened office that was still hers, the documents on the conference table waited for morning. The case was not over. The FBI investigation was just beginning. The board session was still ahead. Daniel Whitmore was somewhere in this city with 2 boxes of files and a team of attorneys and whatever remained of his 18 months of careful construction. None of that was resolved. But tonight, for the first time in a very long time, Victoria Hayes was not trying to resolve it. She was going to eat grilled cheese made with the good cheese by a 7-year-old who had decided without being asked that today was a day that deserved the good cheese. And for tonight, that was enough. The grilled cheese was perfect. Not in the way that expensive food is perfect. Not technically precise or professionally executed. Perfect in the way that food made by someone who wanted to feed you is always perfect, which is a different category entirely, and one that Victoria had largely forgotten existed. Sophie had cut the sandwiches diagonally, which she explained was the correct way, and had arranged them on the plate with the tomato soup in a bowl positioned exactly to the left, not the right, because she said the right side was for the spoon, and you needed room to operate. She presented this to Victoria at the kitchen table with the focused pride of someone who has executed a plan they have been thinking about for several hours. "I used 2 kinds of cheese," Sophie said. "The orange kind and the white kind. The white kind melts better, but the orange kind tastes more like cheese." "She's been workshopping this for 40 minutes, Ethan said from the counter where he was cleaning up with the ease of someone performing a routine that has become muscle memory. "I wasn't workshopping," Sophie said with dignity. "I was refining." Victoria looked at the plate in front of her. Then she looked at Sophie. And something happened in her face that she did not try to manage or control, a softening that was complete and unguarded and had nothing professional about it. "Sophie," she said, "this is the best dinner I've had in a very long time." Sophie sat down across from her with her own sandwich and considered this seriously. "Did you not eat good food before?" "I ate expensive food," Victoria said. "It's not always the same thing." Sophie thought about this. "That's kind of sad." "It is a little sad," Victoria agreed. "Well," Sophie said, picking up her sandwich with both hands, "you can eat here whenever." Victoria looked across the table at Ethan, who was studiously focused on drying a pan. But she could see his expression from the side, and it was the same one she had learned to read over the past 2 days, that brief, genuine thing that had nothing performed about it. They ate. The 3 of them at a kitchen table in Pilsen, with the city quiet outside, and the particular warmth of a house where someone has cooked for you and means it. It was 8:43 in the evening. The longest day Victoria Hayes had experienced in a decade was finally giving way to something that felt improbably like rest. She was wrong about the rest. Her phone rang at 9:17 p.m. She looked at the screen and felt the evening's warmth leave her in a single cold pull. The number was Marcus Chen. Marcus did not call at 9:17 p.m. unless something had broken. She answered. "Tell me," she said. "Victoria." His voice was careful in the way that careful voices are when they are deciding how to say something they do not want to say. "We have a development. I need you to stay calm while I tell you." "Marcus, I filed an FBI referral this morning and neutralized a legal tripwire 3 hours before it detonated. My ability to stay calm is well established. Tell me." A pause. "Daniel's attorneys filed an emergency injunction at 8:50 p.m. tonight. Not against the company, against you personally." She sat very still. "On what grounds?" "They're claiming that your filing with the Secretary of State today constitutes tortious interference with an existing contractual arrangement, and that the manner in which you obtained Ellen Park's countersignature constitutes coercion of a board member." He paused. "They also allege that you have been systematically misrepresenting the company's financial position to the board for the purpose of personal enrichment." She heard the words. She processed them individually. She understood each one. The personal enrichment allegation was not incidental. It was the mirror image of what she had filed against him, a counter-accusation designed to muddy the water to make the story not about Daniel's fraud, but about a dispute between 2 executives, both of whom were claiming the other was corrupt. He was not defending himself. He was trying to make himself and Victoria indistinguishable. It was smart. It was very smart. "What's the court date?" she said. "Emergency hearing. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Judge, Patricia Doran, Cook County Circuit Court." 9 a.m., 12 hours from now. "Who is Judge Doran?" she said. Appointed 2019, corporate law background. Not known for being sympathetic to what she has referred to in past rulings as, quote, procedural gamesmanship. She dismissed a similar emergency injunction in 2022 that she said was again quoting an abuse of the emergency provisions as a litigation weapon. A pause. She might actually be the best judge we could draw for this. Or she'll see our Secretary of State filing as the same gamesmanship. That's the risk, Marcus said. But our position is defensible. The Illinois Business Corporation Act provision we used is clean law. We didn't invent it. We found it and applied it. He found a judge at 9 p.m. on a Thursday night, Victoria said. That's not a standard filing. No, Marcus said. That's a favor. He called in something. We need to know what. She was already standing. She had moved from the kitchen table to the hallway without entirely registering it. The automatic motion of a person whose mind has fully re-engaged and whose body is following. I'll be in your office at 7 a.m., she said. Have everything on the personal enrichment allegation ready for me to review. I want to see every financial record they could possibly be referencing, and I want it annotated. Victoria. 7 a.m. Marcus. She hung up. She stood in the hallway of Ethan Miller's house in Pilsen and breathed for 3 seconds. Then she went back to the kitchen. Ethan looked at her face and put down the dish towel. Sophie, he said without looking away from Victoria. Can you go pick out a book for reading time? Sophie looked between them with the radar of a child who knows when the adult conversation has become a real one. Okay, she said, and left without arguing, which was itself a form of care. He filed against me personally, Victoria said. Emergency injunction, 9 a.m. tomorrow. Ethan said nothing for a moment. Then, what does that mean practically? It means tonight, instead of sleeping, I'm reviewing financial records. She pressed the heel of her hand against her forehead. It means he found a judge at 9 p.m., which means he has a connection to someone on the bench or close to one. It means this is not over in the way I thought it was starting to be over. She dropped her hand. And it means I have to ask you something. Ask it. She looked at him directly. He mentioned Sophie last night, when he came after you. He mentioned your daughter. The kitchen went very quiet. What exactly did he say? Ethan's voice had not changed in volume or tone, but something in it had changed in the way that something changes when a very controlled person reaches the specific boundary of their control. I don't know the exact words. Ellen Park told me this afternoon he apparently mentioned in a conversation with one of his contacts that the man who interfered at the hotel had a daughter and a small construction business, and that both were vulnerable. She held his gaze. I should have told you this afternoon. I was going to tonight before this call came in. Ethan was still. She had seen this stillness before. Not the stillness of someone who is calm, but the stillness of someone who has trained themselves to be still precisely in the moments when they are not calm. When every instinct is activated and the discipline is the only thing holding the shape of the response. He won't go after Sophie directly, Ethan said. He's not that kind of person. How do you know what kind of person he is? Because he's the kind who uses leverage, Ethan said. Mentioning Sophie is leverage. It's a message to me about what he could do, not what he's doing. He wants me to back away from being associated with you. He wants me to pull Sophie into my calculation and decide she tips the balance. Does she? Victoria said. The question was direct, and she meant it to be. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. No, he said. And I'll tell you why. Because if I back away from the right thing every time someone threatens something I care about, I teach Sophie that that's how you live, that you protect yourself by abandoning what's right. I'm not teaching her that. A pause. Sophie is safe. Mrs. Kowalski next door has a security system and a very large dog, and she's been looking out for Sophie since she was 2 years old. I'll make a call tonight, but I'm not backing away. Victoria had met a great many men in her professional life. Men who were powerful in visible ways, men who wore their confidence like a uniform, who occupied rooms by volume and certainty and the weight of what they owned. She had not met many who were quiet in the way Ethan Miller was quiet, whose steadiness was not performance, but foundation. Who said I'm not backing away without raising his voice or needing her to acknowledge how significant the statement was? Okay, she said. Okay, he agreed. I need to work tonight, she said. I'm sorry, I know that's not. There's a desk in the guest room, he said. And the Wi-Fi password is on a sticky note on the router. I'll make coffee. She looked at him. Ethan? Victoria. Why do you keep doing this? He thought about it for a moment, genuinely the way he thought about things. Because you're worth doing it for, he said, simply, without inflation. And because Sophie likes you and she's usually right about people. He turned to the coffee maker. Go get your laptop. She went. It was 9:41 p.m. She worked until 2:15 in the morning at the desk in the guest room, with the window reviewing financial records and annotating every document that Daniel's attorneys could theoretically weaponize. Marcus sent her 4 updates between 10 p.m. and midnight, each one more detailed than the last each one, chipping away at the personal enrichment allegation line by line. The allegation was thin. She had known it would be because she had not been enriching herself personally from company funds, which meant any allegation of it would have to be constructed from mischaracterizations of legitimate transactions. But thin allegations argued well in a courtroom could plant doubt with a judge in an emergency hearing. Doubt was all Daniel needed to delay the FBI investigation to create breathing room for his attorneys to negotiate to buy himself time. Time was the currency now. At midnight, Ethan knocked on the door and put a fresh coffee on the corner of the desk without a word and left. She drank it without looking up. At 1 a.m., Marcus sent her a document that stopped her cold. It was a financial record she had not seen before, not from Hayes Technology Group's accounts. From a personal account. Her personal account. A transfer of $240,000 made 14 months ago to a private holding company called Meridian Asset Solutions, LLC. She stared at it. She had never made this transfer. She had never heard of Meridian Asset Solutions, LLC. She called Marcus immediately despite the hour. He answered on the first ring. I see it, he said before she could speak. I've been looking at it for 20 minutes. I did not make this transfer, she said. I believe you. Marcus, $240,000 from my personal account to a company I have never heard of 14 months ago. I know. How is this possible? My personal accounts require dual authentication, a security key, and a Victoria. His voice was careful. 14 months ago, who had access to your personal financial accounts? She stopped. Thought. 14 months ago, she had been managing her father's final illness. She had been traveling between Chicago and his care facility in Arizona every 2 weeks. She had been running a company from a hospital waiting room and a rental car. She had been exhausted. She had been doing what people do when they are exhausted and trying to keep too many things alive simultaneously. She had given limited financial account access to Daniel. Not full access. Limited. To manage 2 company expense reimbursements that had gotten tangled with her personal accounts during the Arizona periods when she couldn't manage it herself. He used the access window, she said. The transfer happened on a Tuesday, Marcus said. You were in Scottsdale. I checked your travel records. You were at your father's facility. She sat at the desk in the guest room in Ethan Miller's house in Pilsen at 1 in the morning and felt the full architecture of what Daniel had built fall into complete clarity for the first time. He had not just built a mechanism to take control of the company. He had not just manipulated board members and filed documents and constructed a legal tripwire. He had also quietly 14 months ago moved money from her personal account into a shell company that he controlled, creating evidence of personal enrichment. Evidence that he now tonight was using to build an emergency injunction. He had been building her guilt for 14 months, constructing a version of her that was corrupt, that had been stealing, that deserved to be removed. And he had timed it precisely, not using it during the 18 months of quiet construction, keeping it in reserve for exactly this moment when she had gone on offense and he needed a counter. The patience of it was almost beyond comprehension. Can we prove the transfer was unauthorized? She said. The access logs will show his credentials were used, Marcus said. But his attorneys will argue you gave him the credentials and the transfer was legitimate. Proving it was unauthorized requires proving your intent, not his access. Which is harder? Which is significantly harder, Marcus said. She was quiet for a moment. This changes tomorrow's hearing, she said. It makes it more complicated, he said carefully. Marcus, be straight with me. A pause. It makes tomorrow harder, he said. Not impossible. But if his attorneys present that transfer in the hearing, before we've established the unauthorized access narrative, Judge Doran is going to have a muddier picture than we want. She absorbed this. What do we need? She said. The access logs from your financial institution. Tonight. Emergency subpoena if necessary. If we can show his specific credential usage on that date and time, combined with your documented travel records placing you in Arizona, we have the argument. A pause. But I need those logs before 9 a.m. Call whoever you need to call, she said. I don't care what it costs. Already making calls, he said. Get some sleep if you can. I'll sleep after 9 a.m., she said. Tell me the moment you have the logs. She hung up. She sat for a moment in the quiet of the house. Then she opened the door of the guest room and walked to the kitchen because Ethan was still there. She had heard him moving quietly an hour ago, and because she needed, for reasons she could not entirely articulate in professional language, to not be alone with this particular piece of information. Howe was at the kitchen table with a mug and a book that he closed when she appeared. She sat down across from him and told him about the transfer. All of it. The $240,000. The shell company. The 14 months. Her father's illness. The access window. The constructed evidence of corruption that had been sitting in her financial records like a landmine waiting for exactly this moment. When she finished, Ethan was quiet for a long time. Your father was dying, he said finally. Yes. And he used that. He used the period when your father was dying to create the access window. Yes. Ethan looked at his hands. She had learned to read this particular gesture. It was what he did when something had moved past his normal zone of quiet acceptance and touched the specific place where his patience had edges. He is a very cold person, Ethan said. Yes, she said. He is. Are you going to be okay for tomorrow? She thought about the honest answer. I'm going to be ready for tomorrow, she said. That's the best I can offer right now. That's enough, he said. They sat in the kitchen for a while without talking. The city outside was as quiet as a city gets at 1 in the morning, which is not quiet exactly, but quieter, a lower register of its constant motion. The coffee was warm. The house was still. My father built the company, Victoria said. Not because Ethan had asked, because she needed to say it out loud in a room where someone was listening. He started it as a software consulting firm in the late 80s. 4 people in a rented office in Wicker Park. He worked 18-hour days for 6 years before the first real contract came in. She turned her mug in her hands. He was not a warm man. He was driven and brilliant and demanding, and he showed love by building things and expecting you to build things alongside him. I spent my whole childhood trying to be good enough at the thing he valued most. She paused. And I eventually was. But by the time I was good enough, I had also become someone who didn't know how to stop building long enough to ask whether what they were building was making them happy. Ethan said nothing. He just listened. When he got sick, she continued, I flew to Arizona every 2 weeks, and every time I sat in that facility with him, I kept waiting for him to say something that wasn't about the company. Something that was just about me, about whether I was okay. She stopped. He never did. Right up to the end, it was about the revenue projections and the board composition and whether the Series D terms were structured correctly. She exhaled. And I kept going back, every 2 weeks, hoping. He knew you loved him, Ethan said. Not as comfort, as a statement he meant. I know, she said. That's not I know he did, and I know I loved him. It's just that there was also this enormous unspoken thing between us that neither of us ever named, and now he's gone. And it can't be named, and I have been carrying the company as though finishing what he started is the same thing as having that conversation. Is it? Ethan said. She looked at him. No, she said. I think I've known that for a while. I just didn't want to stop long enough to feel it. What would you build, he said carefully, if you weren't building it for him? The question settled into the room like something that had been waiting to be asked. She did not answer immediately. She sat with it. Something smaller, she said finally. Something I could see the edges of. Something where I knew the names of everyone involved. She paused. My father built an empire. I've been running an empire. I'm not sure I ever wanted an empire. I wanted to build something that mattered. Those aren't always the same thing. Ethan was quiet. Then he said, I wanted to save people. That was the whole reason for the army. But saving people in the way I was doing it, the extractions, the operations, it was costing something that I couldn't keep affording. He looked at his coffee. When I lost Marcus on the last operation, not the Marcus, you know, a different Marcus Sargent. Marcus Webb. I sat in a military hospital for 3 days and thought about what I was actually doing. Whether the way I was trying to help was the way I was supposed to be helping. A pause. I came home and built houses. Not as dramatic. Nobody writes about it. But every family that moves into one of those units, I know their names. I see the kids grow up. I know whether the roof is holding, and whether the windows are sealed right, and whether the heat comes on. He paused. That's what I wanted. To help people whose names I knew. Victoria looked at him. The hour, the kitchen, the particular intimacy of two people being honest with each other at 1 a.m, when their guards are down, and the ordinary social machinery that keeps people at comfortable distance has simply run out of fuel. All of it made what she was feeling very clear and very uncomplicated. She was falling for this man, not in the sudden dramatic way of movies or novels. In the slower, more irreversible way of a person who has spent years surrounded by people who wanted things from her, discovering someone who simply wanted nothing from her, except for her to be okay. She was not going to say this out loud. Not tonight. Not with a 9 a.m. court hearing and an unauthorized wire transfer and an FBI investigation all stacked in the hours ahead. But she knew it. And knowing it was its own kind of quiet warmth, sitting there in the kitchen at 1 a.m, with both hands around a mug of coffee she had stopped drinking 20 minutes ago. Go to sleep, Ethan said. I'll wake you at 5:30. You don't have to, Victoria. I know, she said. I know, thank you. She stood. She was halfway to the hallway when she stopped and turned around. Ethan, the man you lost, Marcus Webb. He looked at her. What was he like? A pause. Something moved in his face, old and real, and not entirely healed, the way certain losses stay tender at the center, no matter how much time covers the outside. He was loud, Ethan said. He laughed at everything. He had 4 sisters and he talked about them constantly, and he was completely unafraid of anything except spiders, which he would not admit to anyone except me. A pause. He was 26. I'm sorry, Victoria said. Yeah, Ethan said. Me too. She went to the guest room. She lay down on the bed with the handmade quilt and Sophie's note on the wall and the window that let in the city's ambient light. And she thought about Marcus Webb, who was 26, and laughed at everything, and had 4 sisters. She thought about her father, who had shown love by building things. She thought about the company that bore her name, and whether she was fighting for it because she wanted it, or because she didn't know how to be herself without it. She was asleep by 1:38 a.m. Marcus Chen called at 4:52 a.m. She was awake before the second ring. Tell me, she said. We have the access logs, he said. The financial institution's fraud investigation team turned them in 3 hours fastest I've ever seen. Apparently the pattern of the access flagged internally for them too, and they've been sitting on a suspicious activity report for 14 months. His voice had the specific energy of a man who has been awake all night and has found what he was looking for. Victoria. His credentials were used from an IP address registered to the Kellerman Shaw offices in downtown Chicago. Not from your home, not from any device connected to you, from his attorney's offices. She sat up. He made the transfer from Kellerman Shaw, she said, which means his attorneys were either involved or their systems were used without their knowledge. Either way, that's not an executive accessing a colleague's account with delegated permission. That's a transfer executed from an attorney's office without the account holder's knowledge or consent. The fraud case is no longer arguable. How solid is this? The logs are time-stamped, IP verified, and already flagged by the financial institution's own fraud team. We can walk into that courtroom at 9 a.m. and hand Judge Doran a document that turns his emergency injunction into evidence of additional criminal conduct. A pause. Victoria. He overplayed. The transfer was too clever. He built it to be used as leverage in exactly this scenario, and in doing so, he created a paper trail that goes directly back to him. She stood up. She was already moving. "I'll be at your office at 6, she said. "I'll have everything ready," Marcus said. She hung up, splashed water on her face, changed into the clothes that had been in Ethan's truck. Fresh things that Marcus's friend had brought over. She was going to owe that woman enormously, and opened the bedroom door. Ethan was already in the kitchen. He looked at her face and said, "Good news." "How do you know?" she said. "Because you look like someone who just won something and is trying not to let it show before it's confirmed," he said. He handed her a coffee. "Tell me." She told him. When she finished, he set down his mug and looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not the quiet steadiness, not the careful warmth. Something more open than either. Something almost like pride, but not in himself. "He made the transfer from his attorney's offices," Ethan said. "Yes, because he thought you were in Arizona, exhausted managing your dying father, and you'd never notice a $240,000 transfer." "Yes. And 14 months later, it's the thing that finishes him." "In about 3 hours, Victoria said. "Yes." Ethan picked up his coffee. He looked at it for a moment. Then he said quietly, "Your father would have been proud of you. I don't care what he said or didn't say. A man who built what he built would have recognized this." The sentence moved through her in a way that she was not going to examine right now at 5 a.m. in a kitchen in Pilsen, because she had a courtroom to get to, and she was not going to cry before a court appearance. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was steady. "I have to go." "I know." He pulled his keys from the counter. "I'll drive you." "Sophie." "Mrs. Kowalski takes her at 7. She texted last night that she's already on it." He picked up his jacket. "Come on." At 7:43 in the morning, Ethan's truck pulled up outside the Cook County Circuit Court building on California Avenue. The sun was up and thin, and the city was doing its morning thing. Coffee carts and foot traffic, and the specific purposeful motion of a city going to work. Victoria had the door open before the truck fully stopped. Then she paused. She turned back to Ethan. He was watching her with the same expression as always, steady, quiet, present. "Whatever happens in there," she said. "You know this doesn't—" She stopped, started again. "You know I don't think of you as someone I needed at the right time. I want to be clear about that." He looked at her. "I know," he said. "I just wanted to say it out loud." "Victoria." The corner of his mouth moved. "Go win your case." She got out of the truck. She walked up the steps of the courthouse with the morning sun behind her, and Marcus Chen falling into step beside her at the entrance, and David Park on the other side, and 3 associates behind them, carrying boxes of documentation that amounted to the full accounting of 18 months of fraud, unauthorized financial transfers, board manipulation, and the systematic dismantling of a woman's life's work by a man she had trusted completely. At 9 a.m. exactly, Victoria Hayes walked into courtroom 14B and took her seat at the respondent's table. Across the aisle, Daniel Whitmore sat between 2 Kellerman Shaw attorneys. He was in a perfect suit. His face was composed. He looked across the room at Victoria, and for a moment their eyes met and held across the distance of the courtroom. She saw it then, what she had not been able to see before, or had not allowed herself to see. Not confidence in his eyes. Not the certainty of a man who had built an unassailable structure. Something thinner than that. The expression of a man who had spent 18 months in absolute control of a situation, and was now for the first time uncertain. He knew about the access logs. She could see it in the set of his jaw. His attorneys had told him. They had told him sometime in the last few hours that what he had built as his ultimate counter had become his most exposed position, and he had spent the early morning hours coming to terms with that. Judge Patricia Doran entered at 9:02. She was 63, with the brisk, focused movement of someone who has no patience for procedural theater. She reviewed her notes for 30 seconds and looked up. "Counsel for the plaintiff," she said, addressing Daniel's attorney. "You filed for emergency injunctive relief at 8:50 p.m. last night. This is an unusual hour. I'd like you to explain to me why this could not wait for a standard hearing." The attorney stood. He was the older of the two, from Kellerman Shaw, late 50s, experienced the kind of practiced presence that courtrooms were designed for. "Your Honor, we believe the respondent's actions yesterday in filing with the Secretary of State represent an urgent threat to the corporate structure of Hayes Technology Group and—" "I've read the filing," Judge Doran said. "I'm asking why it was urgent enough for 9 p.m. last night." A pause. "We became aware of additional evidence of financial misconduct by the respondent that we believe required immediate judicial attention." "The wire transfer," Judge Doran said. "Yes, Your Honor." "Counselor for the respondent," Judge Doran said, looking at Marcus. "I'd like to hear your position on the wire transfer allegation." Marcus stood. "Your Honor, we welcome the court's attention to this transfer. Specifically, we'd like to submit into evidence the access logs from Ms. Hayes's financial institution obtained this morning, which demonstrate conclusively that the transfer in question was made using credentials belonging to the plaintiff's counsel's offices, not Ms. Hayes, not any device connected to Ms. Hayes, and not any location where Ms. Hayes was present on the date in question." He walked to the bench and placed the documents in front of Judge Doran. "We would also note that Ms. Hayes was documented in Scottsdale, Arizona, on the date of the transfer, managing the final days of her father's terminal illness. We have travel records, hotel records, and medical facility visitor logs available for the court's review." The courtroom was very quiet. Judge Doran looked at the documents. She looked at them for a long time. Then she looked at Daniel's attorneys. "Counselor," she said, "your client's emergency injunction alleges personal financial misconduct by the respondent. The primary evidence for this allegation appears to be a wire transfer executed from your own firm's IP address without the respondent's knowledge or authorization." She set the documents down with the specific, deliberate care of a judge who is controlling her response. "Would you like to take a recess to consult with your client before I address the implications of that?" The silence in the courtroom lasted 4 full seconds. Daniel's senior attorney said, "Your Honor, we would appreciate a brief recess." "You have 15 minutes, Judge Doran said. "Use them carefully." She stood. The room rose. She walked out. Victoria did not look at Daniel. She looked at Marcus, who looked back at her with the expression of a man who has won something and is professional enough to not show it yet. He leaned toward her and said quietly, 15 minutes is not enough time to restructure a case. She just gave them 15 minutes to decide whether to withdraw. Victoria looked at the table in front of her. "Will they?" she said. "Kellerman Shaw has a reputation to protect," Marcus said. "They do not like being in positions where their firm's IP address is on a fraud document. The senior partner is going to make a very fast calculation about what continuing to represent Daniel Whitmore costs them." She sat in the quiet courtroom with her hands flat on the table. 14 minutes and 20 seconds later, Daniel's senior attorney stood up and said words that Victoria Hayes would remember for the rest of her life. "Your Honor, we are withdrawing the emergency injunction petition at this time." The room absorbed. Judge Doran looked at the attorney, then at the empty chair beside him, because Daniel Whitmore had at some point in the past 14 minutes quietly left the courtroom. She looked at Victoria. "Ms. Hayes," she said, "given the documentation before this court, I am referring this matter to the Circuit Court's Financial Crimes Division for further review. The original Secretary of State filing stands as valid. The emergency injunction is dismissed." A pause. "This court is adjourned." The gavel came down. Victoria sat for a moment after everyone else in the room had begun moving. Renata, who had slipped into the back row at 8:55, came forward and put her hand on Victoria's shoulder without saying anything. Marcus was shaking hands with David Park. The court reporter was packing up her equipment. and the chair where Daniel Whitmore had sat was empty. He had left quietly. No statement. No dramatic exit. He had simply gotten up while his attorneys were in the recess and walked out the side door of courtroom 14B, and by the time the gavel fell, he was gone. Not the exit of a man who had won. The exit of a man who had finally understood he had lost. Victoria stood. She straightened her jacket. She picked up her bag with the documents inside the documents that had started all of this, that she had been carrying for weeks, that had cost her sleep and trust and a certainty about the world she was still reconstructing. She walked out of the courtroom into the corridor. Marcus came alongside her. "There will be a full board meeting next week. The FBI investigation is formal and moving. Kellerman Shaw is going to drop him as a client by end of day. I'd give it 90% odds. And Ellen Park called while we were in there. She has the third board member confirmation. You have 4 votes. 4 votes. A majority. Enough. Schedule the board meeting," she said. "Already drafting the notice," he said. She walked out of the courthouse into the morning light. Ethan's truck was at the curb. She had not asked him to wait. She had not texted him during the hearing. She had no way of knowing whether he'd driven Sophie to Mrs. Kowalski's and come back, or whether he'd waited the whole time. But there he was, leaning against the truck with his arms folded and his face turned toward the sun, the way a person turns toward warmth when it's available. He looked at her when she came down the steps. She stopped in front of him. She didn't summarize the hearing. She didn't give him the outcome in professional language or lay out what happened in sequence. She just looked at him for a moment, with the full exhaustion and relief of a woman who had been fighting something enormous for a very long time and had just definitively begun to win. "He left the courtroom," she said. "Before the gavel." Ethan looked at her. "Good," he said, simply, as though the one word contained everything necessary. And somehow it did. She put her hand on the door of the truck, and then without planning it, without calculating it, without any of the professional management of self that she had practiced for 20 years, she stopped and turned and stepped forward and put her arms around him. Not dramatically, not with explanation. Just the simple, unglamorous, completely honest act of one person holding on to another because the situation called for it, and she had stopped pretending that it didn't. He put his arms around her. They stood on the sidewalk outside the Cook County Circuit Court on California Avenue for a moment that had no professional category and required none. Then she stepped back. She didn't apologize. He didn't make it into something it wasn't or wasn't yet. "Sophie's going to ask how it went," he said. "Tell her the good guys won," Victoria said. "She'll want more detail than that." "Tell her the lady in the blue dress is okay," Victoria said. "She'll understand." He looked at her with that expression, the one she had been learning the language of for 3 days. "Yeah," he said. "She will." The board meeting happened 6 days later on a Thursday morning at 10 a.m. in the same 37th floor conference room where Victoria had sat with Renata reading the media log on the morning the war began. 7 board members took their seats around the table. Victoria sat at the head of it, the seat that had been hers, that her father had occupied before her, that Daniel Whitmore had spent 18 months trying to functionally take from her without ever needing to sit in it himself. Daniel was not in the room. He had not been in any room connected to Hayes Technology Group since he walked out of courtroom 14B. His resignation had come by email 4 days ago, 3 sentences, no acknowledgement of what had happened, the professional equivalent of a door closing quietly on a house that was already burning behind it. Kellerman Shaw had dropped him as a client the same afternoon of the hearing, exactly as Marcus had predicted. The FBI investigation was active and, according to Agent Tran, expanding. There were, it turned out, other transfers, other shell companies. A pattern that went back further than 14 months and touched more than Victoria's personal accounts. But that was the government's matter now. The board meeting was hers. Martin Cho spoke first. Stood, which was unusual for a board meeting, and he addressed the room with the particular gravity of a man who had spent a week reckoning with his own silence in a hotel ballroom and had decided to say the thing out loud. "Before we begin the formal agenda," Martin said, "I want to say something. A week ago I stood 11 feet away from Victoria Hayes while she was being physically restrained by our COO in front of 400 people, and I did nothing. I have thought about that every day since." He paused. "I don't say this for absolution. I say it because I think this board has for a long time mistaken silence for prudence and hesitation for wisdom. I did. And it nearly cost this company its founder's daughter and its own integrity." He looked at Victoria. "I'm sorry, Victoria. Not for the record, for real." Victoria met his eyes. "Thank you, Martin," she said. And then, because it was true, and because she had learned something over the past week about the difference between grace and weakness. "You came back. When it counted, you came back. That's the part I'll remember." Ellen Park spoke next. She did not stand. She simply laid her hands flat on the table and said what she had come to say. "I was compromised. I believed a lie for 4 weeks because believing it was more comfortable than examining it. I documented that lie almost by accident, and it turned out to be one of the things that broke this open. I'm not proud of the 4 weeks, but I'm here, and I've voted with the truth, and going forward, I intend to be the kind of board member who examines the comfortable thing before believing it." The meeting proceeded. The formal votes were unanimous. Daniel Whitmore's resignation was accepted with a notation of cause. The Secretary of State filing was ratified. The fraudulent restructuring documents were formally voided. And then Victoria stood up to address the board on a matter that was not on the agenda, because she had decided sometime in the past 6 days that the war she had won was not the same as the life she wanted. "I'm going to tell you something," she said, "and I want you to hear it as a decision, not a negotiation." The room went still. "I built this company alongside my father, and I have run it for 11 years. In that time I have missed almost everything else. I have no family of my own that I built. I have 400 professional acquaintances, and until last week I could not name one person I could have called to stand beside me in a crisis." She let that sit for a moment. "I am not resigning. Let me be clear about that. But I am restructuring my role. I'm appointing a chief executive to run day-to-day operations, someone I trust, someone who will be accountable to this board. And I am taking the position of executive chair, and I am using that position to build something this company has never had: a foundation." Renata, sitting against the wall, went very still. "A foundation focused on housing," Victoria continued. "Affordable, dignified, community-rooted housing for families who have been priced out of the cities they built. I've spent my whole career building technology that makes money. I want to spend the next part of it building something people can live inside." She paused. "I've already found the person who's going to help me run it. He builds houses in Pilsen. He knows the names of every family in every unit. He is going to teach me how to do this correctly." Ellen Park was the first to speak. "Does this person have a name?" she said. Not challenging, curious. "Ethan Miller," Victoria said. "And is your interest in this partnership entirely professional?" Ellen said with the very slight dryness of a former judge who had noticed the way Victoria said his name. Victoria looked at her. "No," she said, simply, without embarrassment. "It's not entirely professional, but the foundation is real, and it would be real regardless. I want that on the record." Ellen almost smiled. "Noted for the record." The board approved the restructuring. Not because they had to, because Victoria understood later they had spent a week watching a woman fight for something with a clarity. Most of them had lost decades ago, and it had reminded them why they had gotten into building things in the first place. The meeting adjourned at 11:47 a.m. Victoria walked out of the 37th floor conference room, and this time she was not walking into a war. She was walking out of one. That evening, she stood in the kitchen of the house on South Paulina Street, while Sophie explained in extensive detail the correct method for making the good grilled cheese, which apparently she had decided to formally teach Victoria as a life skill. "You have to butter the outside," Sophie said, standing on the step stool. "Not the inside. People do the inside and it's wrong." "Why is it wrong?" Victoria asked. "Because the butter is for the pan part," Sophie said with the patience of a teacher who has explained this to a slow student. "The inside is for the cheese. If you put butter on the inside, then where does the cheese go?" "On the butter." "You can't put cheese on butter," Sophie said, scandalized. "It slides." "I did not know that." "That's why I'm teaching you." Ethan was at the table watching this with an expression of open contentment that he no longer bothered to hide. Over the past week, something in him had settled, not changed exactly, but relaxed the way a man relaxes when a thing he has been quietly protecting turns out to be safe. "She's a very demanding instructor," Victoria said to him over Sophie's head. "You should see her teach me things," Ethan said. "I've lived here my whole adult life, and apparently I've been loading the dishwasher wrong the entire time." "The bowls go on the bottom," Sophie said without turning around. "Everybody knows that." "I did not know that," Ethan said. "That's why I'm teaching you," Sophie said, and flipped the sandwich with the confidence of a professional. They ate dinner. The three of them. And somewhere in the middle of it, while Sophie was explaining a complicated situation involving a girl at school named Bethany and a disagreement about the ownership of a specific purple marker, Victoria realized that she had not thought about Daniel Whitmore in 6 hours. Not the case. Not the fraud. Not the 18 months. Not the wrist which had healed to a faint yellow shadow that would be gone within the week. She had spent 6 hours simply living inside a life she was building instead of defending one someone was trying to take. The difference she was learning was everything. After dinner, after Sophie had been read to and negotiated with and finally convinced that 8:15 was in fact bedtime, regardless of her position on the matter, Victoria and Ethan sat on the back steps of the house in the cool evening. "Can I tell you something?" Victoria said. "And I need you to just let me say it without turning it into something manageable." "Okay," Ethan said. "When I said please don't hurt me again that night in the ballroom, I've been thinking about the again for a week." She looked out at the small backyard with the crooked basketball hoop. "I told you it was about my father. About the conditional love, the moving standard. And that's true. But it's not the whole thing." She paused. "The whole thing is that I spent 41 years believing that if I was just strong enough, controlled enough, successful enough, I would finally reach a place where nobody could hurt me, where I'd be so far above it that it couldn't touch me." She turned to look at him. "And that night in that room with 400 people watching and a man twisting my wrist, I understood that I'd built the whole thing on a lie. That there is no amount of success that makes you safe. That the armor doesn't work. It just makes you lonely." Ethan listened. "And then a man in work boots walked out of a crowd," she said. "Someone with no armor at all. And he was the safest person in that room." She shook her head slowly. "I had it exactly backwards my whole life. I thought strength was building walls high enough that nobody could reach you. And the strongest person I've ever met is a single father who builds houses and lets a 7-year-old teach him how to load a dishwasher." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Strength isn't not needing anyone," he said. "I learned that the hard way in a military hospital 3 days after I couldn't save someone. Strength is being able to stand next to people. Being able to let them stand next to you." He paused. "The strongest thing you did last week wasn't winning the case, Victoria. It was getting in my truck when you had no reason to trust me. It was letting Sophie make you dinner. It was saying the thing you just said out loud instead of managing it." She looked at him. "You always do this," she said. "You always say the exact right thing." "No, I don't," he said. "I told you. I say the right thing when it's easy and I know what it is. This one was easy." A pause. "You made it easy." They sat on the steps for a while without talking. The city hummed around them low and constant, the enormous indifferent motion of Chicago at night, going about its business without reference to two people on a back porch in Pilsen, who had over the course of one very strange week found something that neither of them had been looking for. "What happens now?" Victoria said finally. "With the foundation, or with—" He gestured vaguely between the two of them. "Both, either, I don't know. The foundation we build," Ethan said. "Slowly. Correctly. One project at a time until we know how to do it right, and then more. You bring the resources and the structure and the way you move fast when it matters. I bring the knowing the names part. It'll work. And the other thing." He turned to look at her. "The other thing," he said, "we don't rush. Because Sophie's involved, and because you just came out of something that took a piece out of you, and because the good things are worth building slowly." A pause. "But I'm not going anywhere. I want to be clear about that. Whatever this is, and however slowly we build it, I'm not going anywhere." She looked at him in the dim evening light. "I believe you," she said. And she did. That was the strange, quiet miracle of it. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she believed a man when he told her something, not because she had verified it, or calculated the odds, or run it through the machinery of professional suspicion, but because she had watched him for a week be exactly who he said he was, over and over in ways large and small, when no one was watching and nothing was at stake. That was what trust actually was, she was learning. Not a calculation. A pattern you watched long enough to believe. 3 months later, the Hayes Foundation broke ground on its first project, a 40-unit affordable housing development in the Pilsen neighborhood, 3 blocks from the house where Sophie had taught Victoria to make grilled cheese. Victoria was there for the groundbreaking. So was Ethan in his work boots, explaining to a group of community board members exactly how the building's heating system had been designed to minimize costs for the families who would live there. So was Sophie, who had been given a small ceremonial shovel, and who took her role in the groundbreaking with the seriousness of a head of state. The story of what had happened at the Harrington Grand had, in the way of these things, made the news for a while and then faded, replaced by other stories, other scandals, other brief flares of public attention. Some people remembered Victoria Hayes as the CEO who had a breakdown at a business event. More people, after the truth came out, remembered her as the woman who had been targeted by a corrupt executive and had fought back and won. A few people, the ones who paid attention, remembered her as the billionaire who had walked away from running an empire to build houses. But the people who mattered most to Victoria did not remember her as any of those things. Sophie remembered her as the lady in the blue dress who was brave, and who now knew how to make grilled cheese correctly, and who had moved into the house with the good window because Sophie had decided she should. Ethan remembered her as the woman who got in his truck when she had no reason to trust him, and Victoria, when she looked at the life she had built out of the wreckage of the one she had lost, remembered a single moment. A man in work boots stepping out of a crowd of 400 people who were all recording, and none of them moving because a 7-year-old had asked her father why nobody was helping, and her father had not had a good answer, and so he had become the answer. That was the whole thing in the end. That was the entire story compressed into a single moment. Everyone in that ballroom had power. Executives, board members, journalists, security guards, 400 people with resources and influence and every capacity to help. And the only one who moved was the one who had the least to gain and the most to lose. Because real strength was never about how high you could build your walls. It was about whether you would step forward when it counted for someone who couldn't repay you when everyone else was standing still. Ethan Miller had stepped forward. And in doing so, he had reminded a woman who had everything and nothing that the strongest thing a person can do is not to stand above the world, untouchable and alone, but to stand beside someone in the open, with no armor at all, and simply refuse to look away. That is where real strength lives. And that is where Victoria Hayes finally, after 41 years, decided to build her home.